The Friday the 13th timeline is wrong. Wait, let me back it up a bit. This is the Friday the 13th timeline. If you're a fan of the franchise, you probably already knew this. If you're a hardcore fan, then you're probably also aware of the fact that the timeline falls apart like a house of cards the moment you put even 2 seconds of thought into it. What do I mean by that? Well, okay, on the surface, yes, the timeline works. Each new movie does happen after the last movie. For the most part, you can watch them in release order. The only exceptions are Jason X, which occurs after Freddy vs. Jason, but was released before it, and Friday the 13th, 2009, because it's set in a different continuity entirely. So on paper, it seems like it makes sense. What I'm specifically referring to is how after the final chapter, the timeline becomes irreconcilable with itself. 4 to 6 years go by between the final chapter and A New Beginning, 1 to 2 years between A New Beginning and Jason Lives, a super vague 1 to 10 years between Jason Lives and The New Blood, and a literal unknown amount of time between The New Blood and Jason Takes Manhattan. For those doing the math, that's a gap of 6 to 18 years between the 4th and 8th films, which were released only 5 years apart. Jason Takes Manhattan clearly wasn't meant to take place in 2002. But we're both smart. We're both two media literate dudes. We both know that FT13 films were only ever meant to earn a quick buck for Paramount and keep some local industry workers employed. No one ever really cared all that much about the continuity between films, or lack thereof, right? Wrong. Even as a kid, I knew these were cheap, exploitative films. I knew others wouldn't take the writing and world building seriously, but I took it seriously. I love Jason and his stupid patchwork lore. I wasn't an 80s kid, I was a 90s kid. So the initial Friday the 13th craze passed me by, but that might have been for the best. The Fridays that were released in my lifetime were all driven by the hindsight of the franchise's legacy, a legacy that I never got to see get shaped. Since then though, I've seen the way the series fell into hibernation, and I've seen the way people yearn for a true return. The video game may have been a neat but buggy mess, and the Never Hike Alone films were good appetizers, but fans are ready for something of substance. A surprise roster slot in a fighting game like it's 2011 just isn't going to cut it anymore. Luckily, a TV show adaptation is on the horizon at Peacock, but it'll be some time before that show is fully established with its own lore and fans. Until then, many fans like myself are returning to the OG timeline to get their Crystal Lake fix. And now is the best time to be a fan, in fact. Every expanded universe novel and comic has been archived online. Don't have time to read the novels? You can check out the 80s Slasher Librarian YouTube channel right now for audiobooks of them. I'm sure many of these new fans are also asking questions about the film's timeline. Maybe they're wondering which books, if any, are canon, which comics they should read and in what order. Maybe they're trying to figure out when the later films are set. Well, that's what I'm here today to help with. I'm something of an overthinker of fictional timelines myself. You know what I'm talking about. The kind of overthinking that leads to Ben Saint's 13-hour Bionicle lore video, or Torrens' 2-hour Animorph timeline video. Together, we're going to cover the entire Friday the 13th franchise to construct the ultimate, lore-accurate timeline. This means evaluating every film, every novel, every comic book, every video game, and yes, even every episode of the TV show, to construct the most accurate and canonical viewing order of the franchise. The OG timeline is finished. If the 2009 reboot didn't confirm that for you, then the upcoming TV show adaptation will. So what better time to go about fixing the original timeline? Let me get this out of the way now. This is not a deep dive into the real-world story behind the making of these films. I'll give behind-the-scenes context when necessary, but what we're primarily focusing on are the literal events depicted within the media. We're treating the franchise as if it were historical texts needing to be deciphered. With my spiel out of the way, my name is Slasher, and I'm proud to present First up, of course, is the franchise originator, Friday the 13th, released in 1980, directed by Sean S. Cunningham from a screenplay by Victor Miller. The film opens with a prologue, easily placed and dated for our convenience. Camp Crystal Lake, 1958. The month and day aren't given, but we know it's summertime, given that it's a summer camp. We follow an unnamed individual's point of view as they walk the campgrounds at night, listening to the sounds of the counselors singing while tiptoeing past a cabin full of sleeping campers. When two of the counselors, Claudette and Barry, break off from their party to explore one another, our unnamed observer follows and ambushes them with a knife, senselessly murdering them both, revealing to us how Camp Crystal Lake came to be known as Camp Blood. Moving into the film proper, we're greeted with a second timestamp. Friday, June 13th, the present. We don't have enough info yet to tell us when the present is, but we can assume it's around 1980, the year of the film's release. We're introduced to Annie, a young woman hired to cook for the kids at Camp Crystal Lake, which is finally being reopened after all these years later. She's derived in the community of Crystal Lake, as evidenced by the DJ on the radio in this scene, so that must be the name of the lake, the camp, and the town. I bring it up because it'll become important later. Annie asks the patrons of a local convenience store for directions to camp, prompting a few glares. Local trucker Enos is heading out that way and offers her a ride, but not before they're accosted by local doomsayer Crazy Ralph, who warns them of Camp Blood's death curse. Here we learn of a few more tragedies surrounding Camp Blood. Unexplained fires, a boy who drowned in 57, and a case of water poisoning in 62. Only one of these dates is significant, but we'll add both. We're also told that a man named Steve Christie has spent the past year working to get it reopened, and Enos warns Annie that it's destined to fail, begging her to quit. Annie, of course, doesn't listen, and the pair part ways, with Enos dropping her off outside a cemetery of all places, clear foreshadowing of what's to come. I don't want to spend too long on each film's individual story beats, as that would make this video like 4 times longer than it's already going to be, so we'll run through this quickly. Also en route to camp are this film's horny couple, Jack and Marcy, and their blue-balled friend, Ned, all hired to work as counselors for the summer. Once arrived, they meet Alice, Brenda, and Bill, as well as the owner, Steve Christie, who leaves for town not long after this to restock on supplies before a big storm is said to hit the camp that night. We get our next date via the camp's welcome sign, revealing it was established in 1935. Again, it's a summer camp, so it stands to reason it opened in the summer. Annie, the cook-to-be, flags down a passing jeep and is led on. Unbeknownst to her, she's hitched a ride with our unseen killer from the beginning of the film. When it becomes clear the driver is not taking her to the camp, Annie hops out and flees, injuring her leg in the process. Unfortunately, it's for naught, and our killer slices Annie's throat, leaving her to die alone in the woods. Back at camp, our counselors go through a cozy yet boring series of events. Swimming, killing a real snake on film, then meeting a local motor cop who is on the lookout for Crazy Ralph. Then immediately, our counselors are jump scared by said Crazy Ralph, who is hiding in the pantry, and he warns them to leave like he did with Annie. As the night falls and the storm picks up, we get this film's equivalent to Halloween's Blackest Eyes speech, where Marcy tells Jack about an ominous and foreboding dream she's had a few times over the years.
Really? Yeah, I've had this dream about 5 or 6 times where I'm in a thunderstorm, and it's raining really hard. It sounds like pebbles when it hits the ground. I can hear it. I try to block out the sound with my hands, only it doesn't work. It just keeps getting louder and louder. And then the rain turns to blood. And the blood washes away in little rivers. And then the sound stops.
Like the Blackest Eyes speech from Halloween, which would go on to inform much of Michael Myers' characterization and the film series' mythos for years to come, this moment marks the beginning of a strange pattern of women in or around Crystal Lake having deadly premonitions. Real Lake Mungo type shit, and often overlooked when discussing the franchise. Now in the film's finale, the counselors are of course picked off one by one. First Ned, then Jack, then Marcy, then Brenda, then Bill. While all this carnage is going down, Steve has a lovely meal at the town's diner, gets a lift from the local police when his car won't start, gets a quick speech from the officer about how Friday the 13th and the full moon cause people to do crazy things, then gets dropped off outside the camp where he meets his demise by the hands of our unseen killer, who we learn is someone familiar to him.
Hello? Who's that? on this mess.
As Alice, now all alone, braves the storm to find her friends, she runs into an old woman, Pamela Voorhees, the former camp cook who worked for the original owners of the camp, the Christies. Pamela reveals to us, and a terrified Alice, that the boy who drowned in 57 was her son, Jason, which is what set her on this path of vengeance. The fires, the stabbings, the poisoning, and the recent murders were all the act of a grieving mother seeking retribution. In the ensuing struggle between Alice and Pamela, the latter gets her head lopped off with a machete. Alice, weakened and in shock, rows herself out onto the lake to find peace. The following morning, on Saturday the 14th, police officers pull up to the lakefront to find Alice still in the canoe. But before she can be rescued, the rotted, waterlogged corpse of Jason Voorhees rises from the deep and drags her below. The scene then cuts immediately to Alice waking up in the hospital, implying it was all a nightmare. The same officer who gave Steve the lift earlier is with her. Alice asks him if they found the boy who had grabbed her.
Boy. Is he dead too? The boy, Jason.
Jason?
In the lake, the one who attacked me, the one who pulled me underneath the water.
We didn't find any boy.
Then he's still there.
The film ends with one last haunting shot of the lake. This is what we've got for our timeline so far. It's a straightforward timeline with more lore than you might have remembered, but don't worry, things are going to start to get weird real quick. Friday the 13th would go on to earn just under $60 million worldwide against a $500,000 budget. With the box office gross that massive, a sequel was a no-brainer, and so Friday the 13th Part 2 was released just a year later in 1981, directed by Steve Miner from a screenplay by Ron Kurz. The sequel opens with a prologue. Unlike the first film, we're not given any timestamps. A man stalks the streets at night, while Alice, the first film's survivor, reels from a nightmare in her apartment nearby, wherein the previous film's finale is recapped for us. Not long after waking, and after shrugging off her mother's pleas to return home over a phone call, Alice is jump-scared by the slightly decomposed head of Pamela Voorhees sitting inside her fridge. She tries to run, but a large-framed man, the same man stalking the streets from earlier, takes hold of her and forcefully rams an ice pick through her temple, killing her. The film then skips ahead in time and we meet the counselors in training at Packanack Lodge, this film's victim group. There's the resident horny couple, Jeff and Sandra, their dweeb friend Ted, along with Mark, Vicky, Terry, thick eyebrow Scott, and our two main characters, child psychiatrist in training Ginny Field and director of the counselor training program Paul Holt. The two are something of an item. Everyone is here to brush up on their camping skills before getting assigned to various summer camps in the area, and where their training just happens to be along the shores of Crystal Lake. And in doing so, they've attracted the attention of Jason Voorhees. It's well known that the fathers of Jason, Tom Savini, Sean Cunningham, and Victor Miller, always intended for him to be nothing more than a dead kid. The idea that he would become the killer never once crossed their minds, nor did the idea of a sequel. So Jason being alive at all is indeed a retcon. Our first of many in this series. To prep audiences for this change in killer, we're given a lovely scene with Paul telling a campfire story to his counselors. He tells the tale of Friday the 13th. And yes, I do mean that in a meta-narrative sense. He refers to those events as happening on, quote, that Friday the 13th, and recaps what happened to Alice and the other counselors. As Paul tells it, Jason's body was never found after he drowned in 57. The locals say he survived and that he haunts the woods surrounding the lake. Paul tells him about Alice, and we learn that she went missing 2 months after her ordeal at Camp Blood. He then tells his counselors that they're the first to be back at Crystal Lake in the 5 years since. Our counselors mingle for the night as Crazy Ralph spies through a window. Unfortunately, Jason finds him and kills him. The following day, so day 2 of this film's timeline for those keeping track, the counselors go about their duties and have fun exploring the area and flirting. The first of our cast to die this go-around is actually Muffin, Terry's dog, who runs into Jason in the woods just before the film smash cuts to hot dogs grilling. Part 2 isn't a comedy by any means, but it definitely marks the franchise's first major shift into a more lighthearted, self-aware series. Jeff and Sandra venture off to search for Camp Blood and stumble upon Muffin's mangled corpse, and not long after are caught trespassing at Camp Crystal Lake by one of the local officers. After dropping the couple back at Packanack Lodge, the same officer spots Jason fleeing through the woods and gives chase on foot. He eventually stumbles onto a little makeshift shack in the woods where he finds something that leaves him stunned, giving Jason an opening to ram a hammer into the top of his head. Later that night, half of the counselors, including Paul and Ginny, ride into town to celebrate their last free night before Paul's rigorous training is set to begin in earnest, and the other half stay behind at the lodge for some personal time. Since there is no reason to assume summer camp season in this region has changed from the first film to the second, we can deduce that we're most likely in the same time frame our cast from the first film were, which is within a few weeks of summer camp's opening. So June is a pretty solid bet. Much like in the original film, once night falls, so too do the bodies. First Scott, then Terry. In town, Ginny, Paul, and Ted are getting drunk at a roadhouse, and Ted gives us this line.
This whole thing's ridiculous, really. You know, 2 of our kids got hauled in today. Of course, 5 years ago, some girl, panics and falls out of a canoe. It's absurd.
Which is another interesting retcon, that Alice's nightmare of falling into the lake did happen, just without Jason being there dragging her down. Ginny muses about Jason being real, and both men laugh her off, but she ignores them, wondering what a deranged beast boy running around Crystal Lake would be like. Ultimately, Paul blows her off.
Well, what do you think?
I think you're drunk.
I'll drink to that.
Back at the lodge, the rest of our counselors meet their ends. Mark, then Jeff and Sandra, and finally Vicky. Eventually, Paul and Ginny return without Ted, who is drunk and sleeping in town, and the pair find the lodge completely empty. They sense something is wrong and eventually find the blood-soaked sheets that Jeff and Sandra were impaled on right before the power goes out, leading to an ambush. Jason rushes Paul and knocks him out and begins the final chase for Ginny. Realizing the camp isn't safe, Ginny runs out into the surrounding forest, accidentally coming upon the same shack from earlier in the film, Jason's shack. She makes the same horrifying discovery as the officer before her, an altar surrounded by the bodies of Terry, the officer, and Alice's skeletal remains. On top of the altar rests the head of Pamela Voorhees in her famous blue sweater, now crusty and brown, which means Jason was there that night with Alice and must have seen her death if he has her clothes and head. Ginny gets the idea to wear Pamela's sweater and command Jason as if she were his mother, so she can deal the final blow, but it fails when he sees his actual mother's head directly behind her. He nearly kills her when Paul makes his dramatic last-second entrance. This gives Ginny the opening to sink Pamela's machete into Jason's shoulder, deep down into his torso, seemingly killing him. Poetic. With the bad guy defeated and the day saved, Paul carries our final girl back to the lodge so they can lick their wounds. To their horror, they hear the sound of someone trying to get into the cabin, so the pair brace themselves for a final onslaught when it's revealed to be Terry's dog, Muffin, who is alive and well and not mangled at all. Paul and Ginny laugh, the music begins to take on this cheery tone, and anyone who's seen the original will obviously and instantly know this is leading to a jump scare. Right on cue, an unmasked, bearded, ginger-haired Jason bursts through the window, much in the same way he burst out of the lake in the original, and he drags Ginny out into the night. We immediately cut to the next morning, where we see Ginny is actually fine. She's strapped to a gurney and being taken away by first responders. She cries out for Paul, but he's nowhere to be found, leaving his fate a mystery. For now, anyways. The film ends on a shot of Pamela's head inside of Jason's shack. Our timeline is as follows. The ending of Part 1 was easy enough for general audiences to parse. Part 2's ending, however, was more perplexing, with many fans unsure of what events were real and which were all in Ginny's head. Jason had grabbed Ginny and fled into the night, yet by morning she's safe and sound, and Paul is nowhere to be seen. We know that the jump scare isn't real, since the film plainly telegraphs this by having Muffin return, but does this mean Ginny being carted off isn't real too? Well, screenwriter Ron Kurz very confusingly says in Crystal Lake Memories that he wrote Jason jumping through the window as being real. He then says his intention was for Paul to be killed. Ginny survives, and after she's found by the first responders and screams Paul's name, the film would cut to Pamela's head, and a smile creeps across her lips, implying that Jason killed him. As he explains, given the way it was edited for the final release, he can understand why fans might not catch on to this deeper meaning. It's important to note that test screenings found this ending looked terrible, so the theatrical film just ends on a freeze frame of Pamela's head, no smile or wink. But this really makes no sense. For starters, the inclusion of Muffin means it can't be real, no matter what, unless the scene with Jeff and Sandra finding her remains isn't real, which just leads to all kinds of chaos and the entire narrative unraveling. You can argue any scene isn't real at that point. Second, that doesn't explain how Ginny would have survived anyways. Are we to assume both Paul and Jason are just dead off screen from their fight and Ginny, I guess, just collapsed a la Alice in the original? How exactly Paul's death would have gone down is anyone's guess, though I'm not inclined to take Kurz's somewhat inaccurate statement as anything more than a misremembrance of events. As we'll see by the end of Part 3, a lingering final shot is a recurring motif of the series, so there is no reason to ascribe it any significant meaning. However, it at least reveals to us that the final moments with Ginny are real, since that's what the film implies and what Kurz intended. Paul and Ginny did make it back to Packanack, and Ginny did get rescued, it's just that everything surrounding these two things is left unconfirmed. Regardless of its ending, Part 2 lays down much of the groundwork necessary to transition the original film from a one-off story into the long-running franchise, primarily by establishing that Jason did not drown as we were told in the original, and instead sought refuge in the surrounding woodland. This massive retcon to his story is, in my opinion, the biggest contributor to the series' longevity, as Jason would go on to become arguably the most recognizable horror character of all time, rivaling the likes of Frankenstein's monster and Dracula. Part 2 would go on to earn less than half of the original film's total gross, but with a respectable $21 million of its own, it proved to Paramount that there was still money to be made on the franchise, and so Part 3 in 3D, official title, was released in 1982, directed again by Steve Miner from a screenplay by husband and wife screenwriting duo Martin Kitrosser and Carol Watson. The film opens as you probably expected, with a recap of the last film. We see the struggle between Ginny, Paul, and Jason within the shack in the woods. Ginny sinks the machete into Jason's shoulder before unmasking him, but his face is not shown to the viewer. This was the case in Part 2 as well, but I'm emphasizing it now. After Paul and Ginny leave the shack, Jason removes the machete from his shoulder and gingerly crawls away. Spoiler alert, this shot is not filmed from Part 2, but rather newly filmed for Part 3, and instead of having a head full of red hair, Jason is now completely bald like in the original film. They went through all of the trouble of recreating Jason's outfit, but not his face, which coincidentally is only seen in Part 2's fake-out jump scare, as well as showing him remove the machete from his shoulder, meaning that the entire section at the end of Part 2 couldn't have happened, as the machete is still lodged in his shoulder at that time, and he has the red hair. And since Steve Miner directed both films, this must be an intentional retcon. So everything in Part 2 between Ginny and Paul leaving Jason's shack and Ginny waking up the next morning didn't happen. No Muffin, no Ginger Jason, no final jump scare. After a groovy opening credits sequence, we move into the main story, which we learn is happening on the same day as when Ginny is taken to the hospital, per the reporter here. Jason flees his shack and steals a new set of clothes from a local convenience store, run by a bickering couple. This is the outfit he'll wear for several more films. It's his second most famous design and his third iteration overall, and it's just funny that it comes from a dude named Harold. As expected, he murders the couple who he stole from, and the film immediately moves forward an undisclosed amount of time later as we meet a new cast of teens making their way up to the lake for summer. En route to the camp, they drive right by the convenience store from earlier and watch as the police bring out the bodies. It's a convenience store in a small town. Someone's going to notice the dead bodies. This is the following day. There's no reason to assume anything else. These teens are heading up to Higgins Haven, another Crystal Lake lakefront property, owned by the family of Chris Higgins. We'll come to learn that Crystal Lake is massive, housing tons of properties and other secrets. Along with Chris are her friends Debbie and Andy, who make up this film's horny couple, their friend Vera, Cheech and Chong ripoffs Chuck and Chili, everyone's favorite actor turned entertainment lawyer, Shelley, and finally, Chris's milquetoast boyfriend, Rick. At the cabin, Chris tells her boyfriend that they have the whole weekend together, meaning that this is either Friday or early Saturday. But take into account Chris having to pick up each individual friend and drive to Crystal Lake. It would no longer be early Saturday, so they wouldn't have the whole weekend together, meaning this is a Friday, where at any point in the day, one could say they have the whole weekend ahead of them and still be telling the truth. That's the power of deduction. Now, it's about time I should address that scene. Part 3 has two very bizarre instances of characterization for Jason that aren't really in line with how he'd be portrayed in the rest of the series. The first is easily missed. The newscaster in the opening refers to rumors of, quote, sexual mutilation and cannibalism surrounding the Packanack Lodge murders. Like, what the fuck? The other is that scene. While sitting with Rick outside and attempting to rekindle their relationship, Chris tells him a story about an attack she suffered 2 years prior to the film, so circa 1983. After a fight with her mother, Chris stormed out of their house and got this bright idea to fall asleep in the woods to scare her parents. But apparently, after falling asleep, some crazed, ugly mountain man, who we the viewer know to be Jason, attacked her with a knife. She manages to kick it out of his hands, but Jason's still able to subdue her, and he begins to drag her away. Chris passes out and does not remember anything beyond this. When she comes to, she's in her own room, and her parents act as if the fight they had the night before never even happened. Yeah. What? Are you suggesting to me, movie, that Jason kidnapped Chris and put her back in her bed? This film is obviously implying that something nefarious happened, something sexual in nature, but it's so out of place and doesn't make sense when you really start to think about it. Like, A, Jason's wearing Harold's clothes in the flashback, the same one he's wearing in present day. He's not wearing his plaid and bag mask. In fact, he's not wearing any mask. They went through the trouble of recreating his Part 2 look for the opening, but couldn't keep that same energy here when it was needed most. B, even assuming that yes, he did do something to Chris, how did she end up back in her own bed? That makes no sense. And C, Jason seems eager and willing to kill just about anyone. Why would he have spared Chris of all people? I understand the franchise was only 3 films in, with just 2 of those films having Jason in them at all, but come on, this is such weak writing. But despite my whining, I may actually have an alternative explanation to the scene that doesn't just explain away Jason's out-of-character behavior, but actually plays into the theme of the overall franchise. We'll circle back to it at the end of this chapter. Part 3's story is super inconsequential, aside from that one little weird thing with Chris, so we're speed reading this. Shelley and Vera drive into town and piss off a local biker trio, who I always like to envision giving Officer Dorr from the original film a hard time. The trio follow the teens back to the cabin and siphon out their gas in an attempt to burn the whole barn down. Brutal, but pretty in line with biker gangs. Anyways, Jason kills them, of course. You know the drill. Once night falls, so too do the bodies. First Shelley, then Vera, then Andy, then Debbie, then Chuck, then Chili. All in pretty quick succession. And yeah, this is where Jason gets his infamous hockey mask. It's just something Shelley has in his trunk of costumes and pranks. And I'm not trying to downplay the moment. I'd make a bigger deal about it if the film did. There's no scene showing him getting it. He just pops back out of the barn with it on, and you can just tell by the way he's walking around he wants people to ask about his mask. In a repeat of the last film, Chris and Rick return to the camp only to find it deserted. They split up, but Rick is found by Jason off-screen and tossed into the cabin through the window, thus beginning the final chase. Chris manages to survive long enough to get to her van, and in an ironic twist, it does start up, but because the bikers siphoned out the gas earlier, it breaks down just a few meters down the road, giving Jason time to catch up to her. She's forced to turn back and take shelter in the barn, and we finally get a really good look at just how roided they made Jason for this film. In Part 2, he honestly wasn't any bigger than Paul, and actually was a bit shorter by the looks of it, but here Jason towers over everyone. Chris eventually lynches Jason via the barn's pulley system, killing him. She tries to leave, but surprise, Jason's still alive. Yeah, look at his thick as fuck neck, you can't snap that. He hoists himself up and out of the makeshift noose and moves in for the final kill, but double surprise, Ali is still alive too. Yeah, one of the bikers from earlier. His heroic return goes nowhere, and Jason hacks him to pieces like it's nothing, but it does give Chris an opening with an axe, and she beautifully lodges it deep into Jason's fucking skull, even prompting the slasher to let out a very visceral grunt. Jason shambles forward one last time and reaches out for Chris, but succumbs to all of his injuries from the last 3 days and dies in the barn. And yes, Jason actually dies in Part 3, not the final chapter as many fans claim. We'll cover why in a bit. In pretty typical Friday fashion, Part 3 ends with Chris climbing into a canoe and wading out onto the lake, where she witnesses both a reanimated Jason sprinting toward her and Pamela bursting from the lake and dragging her under, just like her son. We learn right after that none of what she just saw was real. She's actually had a psychotic break. She's taken away by the police, and the film ends on a shot of Jason's lifeless body in the barn. Part 3 would be the first time in the series where a character doesn't give us exposition about the lake's curse. In fact, not a single member of Chris's party ever hears the names Jason or Pamela, nor is anyone told about the crimes that occurred here. It's the only Friday film where the name Jason isn't said even once. So then, how could she possibly hallucinate seeing Pamela? Jason is one thing, she just fought with him, but she's seeing things she doesn't even know about, like what Pamela wore when she died. That, to me, screams supernatural premonition, and follows the precedent set by Alice and Ginny before her. Something is definitely wrong with Crystal Lake, and it clearly stretches beyond just Jason. And if you think about it, since both Alice and Ginny had visions of Jason when he wasn't even there, Alice even having hers before actually meeting him in person, then who's to say that Chris didn't also hallucinate an event with him? It would explain why she sees him in Harold's clothes and without a mask on. Anyways, here's our current timeline before we move into Part 4. Part 3 nearly doubled Part 2's box office gross, so despite Paramount's assumption that Part 3 would be the final chapter, Friday the 13th, the final chapter, would be released in 1984, directed by Joseph Zito from a screenplay by Barney Cohen. As is tradition at this point, the final chapter opens with a recap of the last 3 films, this time interspersed with portions of Paul's campfire story from Part 2, and it's legitimately one of the best openings of the series. The story proper picks up at Higgins Haven, nighttime, where first responders are still gathering the bodies from the previous film's murder spree. It's the night of Saturday, so day 5 of Jason's big week for those of you at home keeping track, and Jason Voorhees has officially died. Like I mentioned a bit earlier, we know this to be the case because he's been lifeless on the ground for about a day, and none of the first responders treat him as anything more than a corpse, meaning they likely checked for signs of life and found none. They also literally refer to him as being dead multiple times, with the police chief saying on live TV,
The man responsible for the murders in Wessex County this past week is at this moment in the Wessex County Medical Center morgue.
Yay!
Thank you, Officer Jameson.
he definitely died when Chris sunk that axe into his head. That is his first on-screen death, and possibly his second death ever if you believe Jason actually drowned in 57 and came back to life somehow rather than just hid in the woods. Also of note is that the town of Crystal Lake is in Wessex County. That's neat. It's not a real county in New Jersey though, in case you were wondering. Jason is wheeled into the morgue at the Wessex County Medical Center and, hey, wait, is that Chris? Yeah, I'll be damned. With that curly brown hair, it's gotta be. Yeah, for some reason they included Chris in a small non-speaking cameo in the hospital where she's with presumably her parents. It makes sense that it'd take them about a day to get all the way out there. And no, it's not Dana Kimmel, it's most likely a body double as we never see her face. Anyways, Jason is wheeled into the morgue and stored into an icebox while a horny nurse and the coroner start making out to a news report of his death. As you'd expect, Jason comes back to life, somehow. That's what audiences came to see. It's never stated how, he just does. Jason slits the throat of the coroner before twisting his head clean around, then ambushes and guts the nurse. Then the film smash cuts to Trish Jarvis and her mother taking a little stroll around the woods surrounding Crystal Lake. It's not immediately clear how much further in time we've jumped, but if we look at the past 3 films, most night-to-day scene shifts so far have been the next day, so we're most likely in day 6. Now, this is where the plot synopses start to get a bit longer, because this deep into a franchise, you have to start doing more than just the same thing over and over, meaning the bare-bones plotting isn't going to cut it anymore. From this point onward, the Friday the 13th films get a lot more structured, a lot more complex, and a lot better overall. My script had 3 pages for the first film, 4 for the second, and 5 for the third, but Final Chapter has a whopping 8 pages. Anyways, Trish and her mother return home and we're introduced to a very beloved Friday the 13th character, little Tommy Jarvis. This little rascal, he's going to cause some problems for Jason. The Jarvis family are a very charming, well-written bunch that honestly elevate Part 4 to a new standard that 2 flirted with, but 3 couldn't replicate. And it's not just them. Jason and what little we've seen of him so far is amazing. While I really do love Part 2 and the last half of Part 3, Jason's portrayal in them really was not that great. Part 2 had him as sort of a bumbling idiot, failing in ambushes, easily convinced that his mother was, I guess, resurrected as Ginny speculated he'd desire. Just overall, it makes him seem a bit comical, a little slapstick. But then Part 3 blows that shit out of the fucking water and is like, this just in, the victims of Part 2 were raped and or cannibalized. Like, that's not at all the vibe you get from Part 2, or the original for that matter. Weird. And this was a full decade before Michael Myers would pull a ditty on his niece, Jamie, so I have no idea where this idea came from. It's most likely leaning into this inbred Hills Have Eyes mountain man aesthetic he had going on that they were trying to portray at the time. I don't know. Anyways, here, Jason is fucking awesome. For starters, this is the beginning of Undead Jason, who is known for his enhanced strength and resilience. He was fairly meek in Part 2, like yeah, he could take a punch, but still seemed very human. Part 3 ups the ante a lot by turning Jason into a Victor Crowley-esque gargantuan, and he has the feats to prove it. But here, he's the best of both worlds. He's a sleek and slender-framed wall of muscle, with the strength to twist your whole head around. He's got gross, decaying gray skin, and his nails are black and way overgrown. You may not like it, but this is what peak performance looks like. Anyways, a neat bit of lore here, Mama Jarvis chides Tommy for leaving the front door open, saying, "What if the psycho comes in?" Meaning not everyone in his town is really keeping up to date with the murders going on, since officially Jason is dead. Which is a bit wild to think about. Jason at this point in the timeline is probably the biggest spree killer in American history, with like 20 bodies across 3 to 4 days. But small town, I guess. She also tells us that the neighboring house has been rented out by 6 teens. These would be our main victim group of the film. We've got 2 horny couples in this one, Paul and Sam, then Doug and Sarah. And finally, Ted and Jim, who are both pretty horny dudes in their own right, looking to unwind and maybe pick up chicks while at the lake. En route to their rented cabin, they get a little lost and pull over next to a small, run-down graveyard, and right there is the headstone of Pamela Voorhees. But the who on the headstone is not as important to us as the when. It reads 1930 to 1979. Okay, so you remember how the first film simply presents itself as occurring in, quote, the present? Well, here you go. Pamela was beheaded on June 13th, 1979. Why the film was retconned as happening in 1979 has never been publicly disclosed by Joseph Zito or Barney Cohen. Not to my knowledge, at least. Nothing in Crystal Lake Memories, nothing in Fangoria, nothing in interviews. We can only assume it was to realign the film's present-day storyline with the final chapter's real-world premiere date of 1984, and moving Pamela's death back by a year makes parts 2 to 4 occur in 1984. It's sort of fixing a problem that didn't exist, but whatever makes it easier on the writers, I guess. Anyways, our teens pass by a hitchhiker, but have no room to take her with, so she's left out on the side of the road just as Jason strolls by and rams a knife through her neck. Later in the night, they manage to find the cabin, and Tommy and Trish walk over and introduce themselves to the gang, while Mama Jarvis reads a newspaper with that day's headline, "Mass Murderer's Body Missing," once again reiterating that he was a corpse when the film began. The next morning, so day 7, the teens go looking for some place named Crystal Point, which I guess is just an outcrop along the lake somewhere. It doesn't seem relevant to the overall franchise. Anyways, the teens meet local twins Terry and Tina, who agree to take them to Crystal Point, where everyone strips and swims. Trish and Tommy just happen to be driving into town and pass by, seeing the whole thing. The pair's car breaks down, and while trying to fix it, they meet Rob Deere. Sure are a lot of folks around Crystal Lake right now. Rob helps them with their car, and the pair give him a lift. Rob is a nice guy, but is clearly hiding something, telling the pair he's hunting bears, which is a fun throwaway reference to Part 2.
Among other things, this is bear country. And contrary to what everybody hears, bears are dangerous.
I'm not going to wait until the third act to discuss this. I'm going to bring it up now. This is Sandra's older brother. Yes, that's right. Sandra from Part 2, Jeff's girlfriend. He asks about who all is in the area and says he doesn't expect anyone would be living this deep in the woods. What he's hunting, we can presume, is Jason Voorhees himself. I'm gonna make like Jason and mow down a couple plot points quickly. Rob spends the day with Trish and Tommy while the teens next door have a party. Night falls, so you know what that means. First to go is Sam, who leaves the party after Tina flirts with her boyfriend Paul. She's killed in the lake while floating in a raft. Paul goes out to look for her and finds her in the raft, but Jason launches a harpoon gun into his dick, killing him. Rob hears this and goes to investigate, but returns to find Jason has broken his rifle. Terry leaves the party without her sister because she feels left out, but gets impaled by Jason outside. Back at the Jarvis' house, the power has been knocked out, causing Mama Jarvis to investigate, where she runs into Jason. Back at the party house, Jimbo finally gets laid, then promptly gets a corkscrew to the hand and a cleaver to the face. Next, Tina gets tossed from an upstairs window by Jason, who I guess was waiting atop one of the home's awning. It's not really clear. Circling back to Rob and Trish, he talks about his sister, Sandra, being a good kid. This leads to Rob revealing a series of newspaper clippings, one of which we see is the original 1979 murder spree, complete with artist rendition of the boy that Alice saw in the lake. He correctly identifies this as a depiction of Jason. He reveals to her that Jason's body had gone missing from the morgue along with the coroner and nurse from the beginning of the movie, which is what has led him to believe Jason is still alive. At the party house, Ted gets a kitchen knife to the back of the skull, Doug gets his fucking head crushed with just Jason's bare hands, and lastly, Sarah gets an axe to the heart. Our vacationing teens are all dead. Rob and Trish return home and tell Tommy to lock up the house and wait for them to return while they investigate the home next door with their dog Gordon. Rob descends the basement stairs of the party house, while Gordon fucking jumps from an upstairs window, presumably to get away from Jason, but it's not made clear. While all this is going on, Tommy rummages through Rob's bag and finds the rest of his newspaper clippings, and we get a lot more lore. Body of Friday the 13th murderer missing. Massacre at Camp Crystal Lake leaves one survivor. Murderer strikes cafe. The papers clearly refer to the events of the original film, Part 3, and of course the beginning of this film, when Jason escapes the morgue. But what's interesting is that it refers to Jason as, quote, the Friday the 13th murderer. Now, the only day in the past week that could have been a Friday was in Part 3, when Chris and her friends got to Higgins Haven and had
a whole weekend ahead of us.
Given that we know for a fact in-universe Pamela is recognized as the original killer and not Jason, this has to mean that Part 3 occurs on a Friday the 13th. Let's update our timeline once again. Back to the film, Jason ambushes Rob in the basement and kills him. How do I know that? Because Rob tells us so. Trish runs back to the Jarvis house where the final chase begins. Jason takes an absolute beating here, more than anything he's dealt with up until now, save for the axe to the head that actually killed him. He has his arm sliced open with a machete, his head beaten repeatedly with a hammer, his neck gets impaled with the back of that hammer, he takes a computer monitor to the head, electrifying him, and he still doesn't stop. And he runs! Yeah, this is the third time overall we're shown Jason running, and the first time doing so while undead. While Trish leads Jason away, Tommy gets the bright idea to use his makeup skills to make himself look like the artist's rendition of Jason as a child in Rob's newspaper clipping. Exhausted and battered, Trish returns to the Jarvis house, but so does Jason. She does fend him off, but as we will come to expect from undead Jason, no amount of pain will cause him to stop, if he even feels pain at all. He seems more puzzled by it than anything. Trish makes a final stand, but she's too weak, and Jason overpowers her. That's when everyone's favorite final boy comes to the rescue. Tommy gets his attention, and the monster stops, again puzzled by what he's seeing. Using the distraction, Trish cuts the mask off his face, revealing his rotting visage. Then Tommy grabs the machete and lodges it deep inside of Jason's head, taking out his left eye. And it's fucking gnarly. If you look closely, you can see the top half of his head is nearly split from the bottom. It even moves independently of it. It's not just in the side of his head, it's at an angle coming out the fucking back. The siblings embrace, but Tommy sees Jason's fingers twitching, sending him into a blind fury as he hacks away at Jason 14 more times before the film fades to white. We then cut to sometime later at the Wessex County Medical Center, and Trish is asking about her brother's state of mind. The doctor explains his erratic behavior is an expected response to trauma and his act of self-preservation. He tells her Tommy will be just fine and sends the boy in. As the two hug it out, Tommy gives a look to the camera, and an inquisitive melody plays, implying that maybe he won't be okay. It's never stated how much further in time this is, but it certainly feels like not much time has passed, so I'm going to say this is just later that same night. And that ends what I dub the Camp Blood era. These first 4 films create a solid quadrilogy that covers the initial reign of Jason Voorhees, beginning with him witnessing his mother's demise, followed by the week-long bloodbath he inflicts on the town as vengeance. Despite the last film's finality, Paramount just could not pass up the opportunity to print more money, so Friday the 13th, A New Beginning was released just 11 months later, directed by Danny Steinman from a screenplay by Martin Katrosser, David Cohen, and Steinman himself. The film opens with young Tommy Jarvis wandering through the forest at night in the rain. He stumbles upon the crudely made grave of Jason Voorhees, but flees when 2 older boys come by looking to dig it up. As expected, once he's unearthed, Jason comes to life and makes quick work of the pair before marching over to Tommy. He raises his machete for the kill, just as Tommy wakes in the back of a medical transport van, now much older and played by John Shepard. It was just a nightmare. He's being dropped off at Pinehurst Youth Development Center, a halfway home for young adults who need to be rehabilitated and reintegrated into society. Here we meet Matt and Pam, the director and assistant director of the program respectively. Matt tells us that Tommy's psych profile begins at age 12 with severe trauma, meaning he was 12 in 1984. The film's end credits also list Corey Feldman as portraying, quote, Tommy at 12, so that seems pretty concrete. Good to know, but it only helps if we can figure out how old Tommy is right now. Matt reviews his treatment record, but the dates do not line up with anything that we've seen so far. It shows he began taking medication in 1978, with the most recent date on file being July 1984. Well, if he's 12 in 1984, that would make him 6 in 1978, and I highly doubt a 6-year-old was taking Thorazine. And since the last film went out of its way to realign the film's universe with the real world, I can't imagine that they'd be so quick to throw that away by shifting around established dates again. Ultimately, this is just a prop, and it's not meant to be looked at in HD 40 years later, so I'm not going to put a lot of stock into it being accurate beyond the general idea that Tommy had spent the last 6 years or so in an institution. This Tommy doesn't speak a whole lot, not even when spoken to, but there are hints of his child self in there. He meets the youngest Friday the 13th main character in the series, Reggie the Reckless, when the younger boy scares Tommy with a big rubber spider. Tommy responds by showing off his own toys, the mask he'd shown his mother in the last film, which scares the shit out of Reggie. Tommy gives a slight grin. Immediately after, we get our first full look at the main victim group when the cops return a pair of kids who were caught on a neighbor's property. The trespassers are Eddie and Tina, the resident horny couple. After them, we've got Joey, a somewhat slow and fat kid, Jake, a shy, stuttering kid, Robin, Violet, Victor, as well as Reggie's granddaddy, who is a cook for the facility, Sheriff Tucker and his deputy, Dodd, and finally, the closest neighbors to Pinehurst, Ethel Hubbard and her son Junior, a pair of hermit farmers. Ethel wants Pinehurst shut down. Sheriff Tucker wants to keep the peace, and of course Matt and Pam just want to rehabilitate the teens. It's a good way to set up all the conflicting goals. Sheriff Tucker also inquires about Tommy, clearly aware of the kid's history. Things continue to go wrong for Pinehurst as later in the day, an altercation occurs between Joey and Victor, where the latter violently dismembers the former with an axe he was using to split wood. When first responders arrive, one of them, an R. Burns, has a very distressing reaction to Joey's body before going cold and staring off into the distance. Yeah, I'm sure that scene isn't telegraphing anything. The film takes a strange detour to somewhere else in town as 2 greasers are having car troubles and the pair are slain by an unseen killer. This is probably the same night, but it's not made clear. This has no bearing on anything else in the film. It's completely random. The following morning, Tommy sees a hallucination of Jason before being called down to breakfast, where he beats the fuck out of Eddie for taking one of his masks and scaring him with it. I know I've mostly avoided reviewing these films and have mainly stuck to covering just what we see, but I do have to say John Shepard is a phenomenal Tommy. He embodies this role and turns that frightened but courageous kid into a total badass. I love Part 5's Tommy. Anyways, the sheriff has the greasers' bodies cleaned up, and for no reason whatsoever, we get a few more focus shots of Roy doing his thing. That night, the creepy pervert who dropped Tommy off at Pinehurst tries picking up his girlfriend, wife, booty call, whatever. It's never said. He tries to pick up this waitress, Lana, but the pair are slain just like the greasers the night before. The next day, Tommy has yet another hallucination of Jason. At the sheriff's office, Tucker has a heated argument with the town mayor and claims Jason is behind the murders. The mayor laughs this off, saying Jason was cremated, but the sheriff doesn't buy it, asking the mayor if he saw it with his own eyes. Now, Sheriff Tucker has no significance to the film's events beyond being the token cop of the film, but it is very interesting that this film is toying with the idea of a Loomis-esque skeptic figure of authority. Jason already sprang back to life after being sent to the morgue, so I can understand why the sheriff would want to know for a fact his body was cremated. Back at Pinehurst, Eddie and Tina run off to fuck, again, and are spied on by the Hubbard's newest farmhand, but he's quickly taken out by the unseen killer. The killer then sinks a pair of garden shears into Tina's eyes and uses a belt strapped around Eddie's head to crush it. These are two of the best kills in the franchise right here, and both scared me to death as a kid. That night, Pam takes Reggie into town to visit his older brother, Demon, played by the great Miguel Nunez. And at Matt's request, they take Tommy along, though he ends up opting to stay with the truck. Not long after, Junior Hubbard rolls up on Tommy and startles him, then laughs at how good he scared him. I'm not sure why everyone in the world is looking to scare Tommy this week. Junior realizes Tommy's a new patient at Pinehurst, and this causes him to snap and attack Tommy, who continues to display his badassery by dodging and weaving, landing a left hook, then a backhand to the face, a few body blows, then finally a high kick into Junior's chin. I mean, he beats the fuck out of this dude. He just keeps landing body blows until Junior goes down, and he might very well have beaten this man to death if it weren't for Pam's intervention. You can really see the same DNA in him that you saw at the end of the final chapter. This kid doesn't fuck around. Anyways, Tommy runs off after snapping back to reality, and Pam and Reggie have to go after him. Meanwhile, Demon and his girlfriend, Anita, are slain by our unseen killer. Pam and Reggie return to Pinehurst to find that Matt and George are missing, and the other patients are starting to panic, so Pam has to go back out and leaves Jake in charge. This leads to a pretty sad scene where Jake and Robin are watching TV, and Jake confesses his feelings for her, which prompts her to laugh derisively, and Jake storms off. And here is where I need to bring up something that has been bugging me for a minute. Whoever is updating the Friday the 13th wiki, they're doing a really shitty job. A wiki is meant to be a database of knowledge, but if you look at Robin's page, it makes some dumbass claim about her having PBA, I'm not going to try to pronounce this, a condition wherein one has inappropriate responses to social stimuli, such as laughing or crying at the wrong time. I'm pretty sure it's what Arthur Fleck has in Joaquin Phoenix's Joker. I can only assume they wrote this completely made-up bit about Robin's character because she laughed at Jake when he said he wants to make love to her, and I guess they don't understand that she was just blowing him off. It's not that different from earlier in the film when she and Violet make fun of Joey. They say Robin's PBA is why she's at Pinehurst, but that's so fucking dumb. People with PBA are completely independent and almost never require psychiatric care because it's not a debilitating disorder. I don't know, it just feels like a really terminally online thing to do to make up some fanon shit and try to pass it off as in-universe canon on a wiki meant to be a repository for knowledge on the series. It really bugs me, as it misleads anyone who checks the wiki before watching any of the movies. Nowhere in the film is it said why Robin is at Pinehurst. In fact, we never learn why anyone is there except for Tommy and Joey. Robin is shown responding properly to every other situation in the film. She shows fear when everyone begins to go missing, she screams when Joey is attacked, and she shows anger when Joey annoys her by dirtying up the clean laundry. She doesn't have PBA. And not long after this scene, she shows regret for laughing at Jake and calls herself stupid, not because it was an uncontrollable response, but because it was something she specifically did that she now realizes was mean and stupid. Anyways, rant over. After being turned down, Jake gets a cleaver to the face, but not before we get a glimpse at a calendar in the hallway, which shows us we're in the month of October. This is reinforced by the pumpkins you can see decorating the outside in the chilly fall atmosphere outside. Unlike the previous entries, I'm going to wait until the end of this chapter to go over our timeline additions, so we'll just keep this in our back pocket for now. Robin dies next as part of the aforementioned scene where she laments what she did to Jake, but poetically, she's slain right next to his corpse. Finally, Violet gets ambushed in her room and has a machete run through her. Reggie wakes up in the middle of the night and checks to see if Tommy's returned, only to find the bodies of Robin, Jake, and Violet all piled up on his bed. Pam returns to Pinehurst just in time to catch the arrival of our unseen killer. It certainly looks like Jason. He's wearing a hockey mask with blue chevrons instead of red and a boiler suit, but he's got the lumpy head and the superhuman strength, so it must be Jason, right? Pam and Reggie flee the facility and find an ambulance parked to the side of the road, but when they attempt to get in, they find Roy's partner dead in the chair, and somehow Jason beat them to the ambulance as he's on the far side of it waiting for them. So that's definitely got to be Jason. Look, he's even regrown both of his eyes, and I guess the right one moved up his face where it should be. While running for their lives, Pam finds Matt's body nailed to a tree through his forehead. I have to say, between the garden shears kill, the leather belt kill, the dirt bike decapitation, and now this, Part 5 has some amazing kills. It's a shame the MPAA butchered this one. Oh, and did I not mention the bike decapitation? Yeah, Junior gets his head lopped off and Ethel gets a knife to the face. Who cares? Pam gets chased all over the property, and we get this film's body through the window gag, this time being George with his eyes gouged out. Jason chases Pam to the nearby barn, and just when it looks like she's going to be victim number 19, Reggie rolls up in a fucking bulldozer and launches Jason across the yard. But, of course, he's not dead. He gets up like nothing's wrong, and we have our final showdown in the barn. Pam manages to keep him at bay with a chainsaw long enough for Tommy to heroically return, after being gone from the film for, 54 minutes? God. See, up until now, the film had been trying desperately to make viewers think the killer was Tommy. He kept conveniently running off before Jason showed up. We got a reiteration that he can make latex masks. He's shown to be prone to violent outbursts. And of course, he hallucinates Jason's phantom every morning after a murder has occurred. But here we see, no, Tommy is just another would-be victim. And even though he's sorely underutilized in the film, he makes this final stand to prove how much of a badass he is, staring down his reanimated foe with all the same courage he did at the age of 12. And Jason seemingly recognizes him, giving him a very deliberate and thoughtful stare before slowly approaching. Shepard proves his worth as an actor in this scene, silently calling out to Jason while Pam and Reggie beg him to run. You can feel the trauma this kid endured and the disbelief he's in right now. His eyes are even dilated, an authentic response to fear. God, I love this Tommy. Then he tanks a full machete slice to the chest before landing that pocket knife from earlier into Jason's thigh. Tommy passes out, allowing Reggie to get the final hit on Jason, sending him flying out the hay door and onto a series of spikes below. Oh, wait, never mind, he's alive. He tries to drag himself back up using Reggie's leg, but Tommy wakes up in time to deal the actual final blow, crushing Jason's wrist with the machete, dropping him onto the spikes below and killing him instantly. This is when we discover that this isn't really Jason, but the paramedic from earlier, Roy. And no, I don't mean Jason switched places with the paramedic. Later that night, Sheriff Tucker speaks to Pam at the hospital and explains Roy's motives to us. Joey, from the beginning of the film, was Roy's son. He kept that hidden from everyone and let his son think he was an orphan. Tucker theorizes that seeing Joey's body made Roy snap. He reveals they found newspaper clippings of the Jason murders in his wallet. And I've got to call a timeout. I mean, that is just really hard to believe. In universe, it's been half a decade since the final chapter. Are we supposed to think that he had those tucked away in there this whole time? Is he a Jason fanboy? Is that why he had to copy a known killer's MO at all rather than just becoming his own slasher? And they show a photo of Jason in one of the clippings, clearly meant to be from some time in the final chapter. I guess to imply that's how Roy knew how to make himself look like Jason? But when did anyone get a shot of Jason? Or is it supposed to be security camera footage? If that's the case, that's kinda neat, I can't lie. But this is what I meant earlier when I said they really wanted you to think Tommy was the killer, even making another reference to his mask-making abilities.
I mean, you act like you made these things or something.
I did.
Solid.
But if it's not Tommy, where the fuck did Roy get a latex mask of Jason's general head shape? Did he make it? Who the fuck knows? Pam goes to see Tommy, who is recovering in a nearby room, but he seemingly snaps and stabs Pam before cackling like a madman, and then he wakes up. It was just a nightmare. But, like, how much was a nightmare? Was Sheriff Tucker speaking to Pam part of that? Was Roy being Joey's father not true? At what part does this continuous sequence of events become a dream? It's like I'm watching Freddy's Revenge. Tommy hallucinates Jason again, but this time he stares the phantom down and it slowly fades away. With a new confidence not seen yet from this Tommy, he climbs out of his bed and pulls Roy's mask out of a drawer, revealing he took it. He stares deep into the eye holes of the mask, sensing something. We then get the real scene of Pam coming to see him, only she finds him missing and the window smashed open and she thinks he's run off, but he hasn't. Tommy, now wearing Roy's mask, sneaks up on Pam and raises a kitchen knife for the kill, and the film fades to black. Ooh, a doozy of an ending. Lots to unpack here. At the time, A New Beginning was meant to take the franchise into a new direction, as the name suggests. We'd already seen the mantle of killer go from mother to son in part 2, so Paramount sought to hand it off again, this time from Jason to Roy, then from Roy to Tommy. That's right. Tommy was always meant to become the franchise's next killer, but upon release, fans rejected the notion of a legacy killer completely, something Halloween fans can relate to, and so this plot point was scrapped before the next film. A commonly held opinion, and one you'll find in other timelines of the franchise, is that A New Beginning takes place in 1988, and I really have no clue how folks come to that conclusion. Also, while doing research for this video, a friend pointed out this confidently incorrect idiot to me who presents Jason X as being before Freddy vs. Jason and claims Jason vs. Leatherface is canon. Yeah, we'll get to Jason vs. Leatherface in the next video, but sadly I have to spoil this for you now. This dude could not be more wrong if he tried. Anyways, let's look at all of our timeline evidence. Contrary to popular belief, the Friday the 13th films don't typically feature campers getting slaughtered. It's normally the counselors who are getting the axe. That means the victim group is typically the same age range as the first Halloween movie. That's fairly standard for slashers of the time. The victims in the first few films were in their early 20s or very, very late teens. Everyone in the original and part 2 is a legal adult. The kids in part 3 seem to be all over the place age-wise, but Chris, Rick, Chuck, Chili, and Shelly are definitely over 18, so there's no harm in assuming they all are. The final chapter is a bit ambiguous. The teens all feel like high schoolers and they do make comments about school, so it could go either way. They also felt the most immature of the franchise's cast members so far, so make of that what you will. But here at Pinehurst, these are young adults who handle chores around the home, operate heavy machinery, and generally are their own boss, as Matt puts it. That isn't something you'd find in a facility caring for kids, despite the phrase Youth Development Center on the sign out front. If Tommy is 12 in 1984, he'd only be 16 in 1988, and that just doesn't fit with the series so far. There's also the fact that Tommy begins the film by being released from the Unger Institute of Mental Health, meaning he's most likely no longer a ward of the state. Why else would they release him? He's not any better. So combining these two pieces of evidence together, it's hard to deny that it's likely that Tommy is being released on or near his 18th birthday, as they no longer have the legal obligation to care for him, which would mean the film can't occur earlier than 1990. That's a whopping 5 years in the future from the film's real-world release date of 1985. And remember, we already know the film happens during October via the pumpkins in the calendar at Pinehurst. Coming off the weak sales of A New Beginning, Paramount had just one goal in mind with the next installment: bring Jason back. And so Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, was released in 1986, directed and written by Tom McLaughlin. The film opens with Tommy Jarvis once more, who's become something of a cornerstone of the Friday mythos by this point. He and his friend Hawes are en route to a cemetery. Tommy has unfinished business. Immediately, we have some questions. What happened to Pam? Did Tommy kill her? Is that why he's coming from an institution again? Was the ending to A New Beginning even real? When Part 2 ended, things weren't all that clear-cut, but 3D came along and cleared a lot of it up. But here we've got the exact opposite situation. Jason Lives answers nothing about Part 5's ending. It's a bit confusing for first-time viewers, but let's keep watching and see if things start to make sense. Oh, also, this is as good a time as any to mention there's a common fan theory that the truck Tommy and Hawes are in is the same one that Pam uses in Part 5. It's a cute idea, but I feel it only exists for fans to fill the void in their hearts left by Tom McLaughlin when he chose not to clarify what happened at the end of Part 5. They're not the same make and model, they're not even the same shade of blue. Plus, how would that conversation even go down? Sorry for scaring you there, Pam. I was never actually going to stab you. Anyways, can me and my friend borrow your truck for however long we want? I don't know. If you subscribe to that theory, then more power to you. I used to as well, but for reasons we'll get into, I no longer think that. But nothing in the film suggests this is the case. It's purely fanon. If anything, the film pretty plainly states it's Tommy's truck. Anyways, as Tommy explains, the plan is to destroy Jason's body once and for all, burning it. In the prior film, we were told Jason's body was already cremated. Maybe the sheriff just got it wrong, I guess. Strange. We also see Tommy is in possession of Jason's mask. We're made to assume this is the original mask, since it has the axe notch that Chris put into it in Part 3, but it's not clear how he got hold of it. It's possible he always had the mask. After all, he was seemingly allowed to keep other masks from his childhood as evidenced in A New Beginning. But on the other hand, that mask was most likely put into an evidence locker somewhere. Maybe he made this one? He does say he knows how to make masks in both of the previous films, but the film also implies it's the original mask, as he intends to destroy it along with Jason's body. I don't know. You could argue that Tommy overhauled Roy's mask, which we know he kept somehow. He said twice in as many movies that he can make and alter masks. Maybe it was his way of exercising Jason's influence. The film never states one way or the other, but you'd think if this mask and truck were the same ones from the film before, there'd be more to connect those dots for us. The pair search the cemetery and find Jason's headstone, and they dig up the old hockey puck. He's definitely dead. His body is being devoured by worms and maggots. Upon seeing the corpse, Tommy goes into a trance, unable to resist the urge to attack the body with a loosened picket from the iron fence nearby. He stabs the body 7 times before he calms down, but just as he goes to retrieve the gasoline, a storm forms overhead, and 2 bolts of lightning strike the iron picket, sending 600 million volts of electricity into the corpse. Immediately, Jason's eyes burst open, and he's angry. He rises from his grave, scaring the fuck out of both Tommy and Hawes, who scramble to get away. Hawes is killed when he goes to defend Tommy. Jason rams his fist straight through the man's chest, ripping his heart out. He falls into Jason's casket, inadvertently shutting it. Tommy manages to escape, and Jason dons his hockey mask once more, ready to spill blood. We also get this great James Bond homage where Jason walks into circular frame and slashes at the camera. His transformation into a pop culture icon is complete. Tommy hauls ass to the police station to warn the cops of what he's awoken and... Wait, look at that. Does that say Forest Green County Sheriff's Department? Isn't Crystal Lake in Wessex County? Strange. He speaks to Sheriff Sheriff Garris, and tries to explain what he's done and that Jason is alive and coming home. But all that does is make Sheriff Garris pissed off. Upon learning Tommy's name, Garris immediately becomes suspicious, pointing out how Tommy had been in a clinic ever since the night Jason killed his mother, which we know isn't true, since he was released to Pinehurst after being in a clinic. Strange. Garris doesn't believe a word out of Tommy's mouth, and has him locked up, assuming he's still nutty in the head. This is where we get an explanation for the Forest Green name. The residents of Crystal Lake wanted to move past the memory of the brutal slayings, and as such changed the town name, and presumably the county as well. Elsewhere, Jason is making his way back home to Crystal Lake, just as Tommy predicted, and he kills a couple that crosses his path. The following day, we meet our main victim group as they arrive at the police station. The easygoing rocker Court, the kind-hearted Paula, the sarcastic Sissy, and rebellious Megan, Sheriff Garris' daughter. They're all counselors at Camp Forest Green, and they're looking for the camp organizers, the couple Jason murdered the night before. Megan immediately takes a liking to Tommy, which only pisses Sheriff Garris off more. Timeline-wise, we learn that just the mention of Jason no longer immediately brings to mind the horrors of Camp Blood. His name is said out loud about 4 times before Sissy asks,
You mean the Jason of Camp Blood?
So it's been long enough that the folks of Forest Green, have seemingly moved on, and Sheriff Garris makes plans to escort Tommy to the town limits. Back at the cemetery, the fourth wall breaking groundskeeper reburies Jason's grave with Hawes still inside the casket. As Megan and her friends prepare for the kids coming to camp, they wonder if Jason could actually be real, even pointing out that today is Friday the 13th. We'll update our timeline at the end of the recap, so don't worry about it for right now. We've got lots to discuss at the end. On his way back to the camp, Jason murders 5 company executives who are having a company paintball match. Nothing more to say here, it's just a great Jason scene, one that fleshes him out as a character. While being escorted out of town, Tommy suddenly breaks off from the main road and veers towards the cemetery, forcing the sheriff to follow so he'll see the unearthed body. But as we mentioned before, the caretaker reburied the coffin with Hawes inside it, of course destroying Tommy's credibility with the cops completely. At Camp Forest Green, the counselors are having difficulty adjusting to their jobs without the camp directors. And I must give Jason Lives some major props for utilizing the theme of bad luck here. In this instance, a very clever use of Jason's agency to indirectly create bad luck for those around him. It sort of harkens back to the original film when Alice and the others are discussing how none of them are good cooks, but they'll need to fill in for Annie, who never showed up. Themes like this get lost in many of the sequels. Garrus drops Tommy off outside of Crystal Lake.
You're gonna be sorry if you don't shut up.
Oh, sorry, Forest Green. And once night falls, Jason kills the caretaker and a couple on a date in the woods. The first of our main cast to die is Court, who's murdered along with his girlfriend in an RV, which ends up corkscrewing and landing on its side. The shot of Jason that follows is iconic, and it's the most badass depiction of him we've ever gotten so far. To me, it's the equivalent of Michael Myers standing in front of the burning house in Halloween Kills. In fact, a lot of Halloween Kills feels very Jason Lives inspired, from it being a high-octane style sequel that seeks to inject mythology into a long-standing franchise, to it employing a thematic rock ballad in its marketing. Following this, we see Tommy coming out of a bookstore with a handful of books on the supernatural. 30 Years Among the Dead are alive, they can and do communicate with you, and a manual of occultism. Clearly Tommy paid attention to all those scary movies he watched as a kid. It's nice having a protagonist who immediately understands the assignment. He seemingly comes up with a way to stop Jason and calls into the police station, but Megan is the only one to answer. She agrees to meet with him, however, knowing that her father won't help him. The next counselor to die is Sissy, who has her head twisted off, followed off-screen by Paula, which seemed extremely brutal given the torrents of blood in the cabin when Garrus finds it later in the night. Like Glenn's death in the first Nightmare on Elm Street, the fact that we don't actually see it is what makes it so terrifying. Elsewhere, the sheriff busts Tommy and Megan and once again brings them back to the police station, but Tommy gets a vindicating phone call. Court's body has been found, and it seems he was killed during the time period when Megan and Tommy were together. Garrus is clearly shaken. He doesn't know what to believe. He goes off to investigate and asks Rick to stay behind, but once he's gone, the duo trick Rick and leave him locked up while they escape the station.
Megan!
If you'll recall, Part 2 reveals to us that Jason is alive and well in the present, and that he must have been alive in 1979 to witness his mother's beheading, since he has her head in clothes. Part 2 even goes as far as showing us where Jason lived in the woods by himself. The implication is that he never drowned, he simply ran off into the woods to live alone for some reason. Jason Lives, on the other hand, gives us this line.
Are you sure this is gonna work? Why don't we just bring the gun and blow him away?
The only way now to stop Jason is to return him to his original resting place, where he drowned in 1957.
Like Forest Green.
At Crystal Lake, this nightmare began.
So Jason did in fact die in 1957, and the lake was his original resting ground. Tommy doesn't say what caused him to come back to life, just like we still don't know why he came back to life in Part 4. Immediately after this, we get another well-written Jason scene, wherein he seems to be just reminiscing on his time at camp. He enters the girls' cabin and just sort of roams around, taking in the scenery. He only stops once he notices a girl watching him, terrified. He confronts her, but never does anything. She begins praying, he leaves when the cops show up, and when the little girl opens her eyes again, the monster has vanished. It's a thoughtful, layered interaction that adds depth to the film. Additionally, I didn't really know where else to bring this up, so I'm talking about it now, but CJ Graham's Jason is iconic, being the basis for every future incarnation of the character. You know, the fast-walking, heavy-breathing, head-tilting, self-aware Jason. Yeah, that's CJ Graham. Outside, Jason gruesomely dispatches Garrus' deputies before bending the sheriff himself in half, snapping his spine and killing him. Megan and Tommy arrive just in time to stop Jason from harming anyone else at the camp, and Tommy goads Jason into following him out onto the lake. His plan is to use a large boulder to chain Jason to the lake floor, which through some vague magic/occultism will keep him down there. He also lights the water surrounding the boat on fire, mainly because it looks cool, but also I guess to ensure Jason pops up somewhere close to the boat so he can entrap him. The two struggle, but Jason breaks the boat and drags Tommy below. Luckily, the chain works and Jason is stuck below the water. Unfortunately, so is Tommy. Megan swoops in for the save and uses a boat propeller to tear open and possibly break Jason's neck. A loud crunch can be heard, deep red blood fills the lake, and he ceases all movement, so it definitely seems like his neck is broken. As such, he's left stranded under the lake. Megan reels Tommy back to the safety of the lakeshore, and he tells her,
"It's over."
But the film ends an undisclosed amount of time later, at the very least it's the following day, and we see Jason is still very much alive down there, even if he can't move his body. His one good eye is still open, and he's angry. And that's Jason Lives, a fast-paced, funny, self-aware, albeit corny, return to form for the franchise, which brought back the creative kills, the sinister score, and Jason as a force of nature. He's at his absolute best here. He's the man behind the mask, and he's after your soul. So where does this fit into the timeline? It's not immediately clear. Right off the bat, this Tommy looks a million years older than the A New Beginning Tommy did. That Tommy, played by John Shepard, definitely passed for late teens Tommy. Most likely 18 as we guessed in the last chapter, but here he's got to be in his mid-20s at least, since Tom Matthews at the time was 28. Right, Tom McLaughlin? According to the shooting script graciously provided by the Friday the 13th franchise.com, Tommy is described as a late teen. And it certainly fits with the character and how he's treated. He's just now being released back into the world from his psychiatric institution. The cops immediately dismiss his claims even before knowing he has a past. And Megan and her friends, who were clearly of typical Friday the 13th victim age, take an immediate liking to him. He's definitely written to be their peer, and they're definitely written to be late teens. We don't have anything more concrete than this, so we have to just accept Tommy can't be older than 19 here. If Tommy's 12 in 1984, then he'd be 19 by 1991, meaning this would be set a year after A New Beginning. As for when in 1991, we've got a couple hints. The first is the temperature. It's clearly cold outside as everyone dresses in layers and jackets. Second, it's not late winter or early spring, because the leaves are actively falling. They're not broken down yet like you'd see after winter. They're freshly fallen. This is fall. So the film takes place on Friday the 13th in the fall of 1991. Except it doesn't. You remember my mission statement from the beginning of this video, to construct the ultimate lore-accurate timeline? Well, if we want to be lore-accurate, we have to really listen to the things Jason Lives is telling us. The film contradicts the entirety of Part 5 on multiple occasions. Sheriff Garris tells us Tommy has been locked up ever since the final chapter. Tommy doesn't correct him. The film refuses to give any explanation regarding the cliffhanger from the last film. Did Tommy do anything to Pam or not? We were told Jason was cremated, only to find out he's interred in a local cemetery. Sure, the sheriff in Part 5 did question if the cremation actually happened, but he only does so the film can justify its whodunit subplot, offering up the idea that maybe Jason rose from the dead again. Oh, and come to think of it, the sheriff. If this film is only a year later, why is Garris completely unaware of a recent series of post-Jason murders that occurred in or near his town? Given that he is fully aware of who Tommy Jarvis is, you'd think he'd know about this second ordeal that went on in Tommy's life, especially since it involves the guy whose job he took over and a killer whose body count isn't that much smaller than Jason's. And while some argumentative fans will claim that those aren't hard pieces of evidence, I'd like to bring up this quote from director Tom McLaughlin from Crystal Lake Memories. I'm going to pick up after the final chapter, disregard Part 5, and tie the legend together a bit. I wanted to take the Tommy character that Corey Feldman played and do the same idea, that he was locked away, but instead of getting out and becoming Jason as Part 5, he gets out and just wants to make sure that Jason is dead and in his grave. Clear as day and without any ambiguity. This is why there's no explanation given for Part 5's ending, why dialogue contradicts Part 5's story, and why no one brings up the Jason copycat, and why there are so many similarities between A New Beginning and Jason Lives. Both films open in the fall with Tommy being released from an institution, both show Jason being unburied during a storm, both feature sheriffs in main roles, both tackle the exact same character arc for Tommy where he puts his demons to rest. Jason Lives isn't a sequel to A New Beginning. It's an alternative sequel to the final chapter. It's not a new idea. I won't pretend I'm the first person to realize this, but I am going to be the first person to present it to as many people as possible in scripted long-form YouTube video format with a neat infographic to accompany it. With this revelation, we need to rethink our timeline placement for Jason Lives. For starters, Tommy being 12 in 1984 is lore that was given to us via Part 5. With it no longer being in continuity with the series, do we drop it? Well, not necessarily. That was Feldman's actual age when filming the final chapter, so it seems less like unique info from Part 5, and more likely just a way for the film to differentiate old and young Tommy. So there's no real reason we need to discredit this bit of info. Tommy was most likely 12 in 1984. He looks, sounds, and acts like a 12-year-old. As I've mentioned already, Jason Lives' script refers to Tommy as being in his late teens, pretty much the same as Part 5, and that's exactly how he's treated by other late teens in the film. That means anywhere from 1989 to 1991, when he'd be 17 to 19. Tom McLaughlin himself says he considers the film set June 13th, 1986, a real-world Friday the 13th, but that doesn't fit the visual season of the film, nor does it fit with the established dates, so Tom must be wrong on this one. Since it's an alternative storyline to the final chapter and directly copies Part 5's plot point of Tommy coming out of an institution, we'll keep the same explanation we did for that film too. He's being released because he's either just turned or about to turn 18. We could even say that this is October, just to really highlight that Part 5 and Part 6 are alternate retellings of the same general story. But I think we'll take the safe approach and just say that this film occurs during a fall Friday the 13th in 1990, at least until we have more evidence to go off of. This is the point where the Friday the 13th timeline becomes unstable. Jason Lives closes the book on this era of the franchise, one largely ruled by conventional slasher norms, with our killer being the only real unexplainable thing. Everything after Jason Lives introduces contradictions, supernatural rules, and material that both flies in the face of the original and that the films themselves never fully explain. So, of course, now feels like a good time to give a massive Haddonfield Registry shout out to our Camp Crystal Lake counselors, Jeremy Dunham, Weiss Belladonna, One Piece Fan 884, Richard McCool 1763, and Sean O'Fett, as well as our Elm Street Dream Warrior, Casper Ty Wolfenbarger. Your support helps this channel tremendously. If you'd like to become a member of the Haddonfield Registry, you can join right here on YouTube as a channel member, or head on over to Patreon, link in the description, where you can pick from 3 membership tiers depending on how involved you want to be with the future of this channel. Now, let's see what Jason's been up to down there, under the lake. Despite earning the best reviews from fans and critics since the 1980 original, and despite the heavy marketing push from Paramount, including a kick-ass Alice Cooper single for the film's soundtrack, Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, would fail to outgross any of the previous films, becoming the franchise's lowest earning entry at that point. While it was clear that bringing back Jason was the right call, there was a growing sense of confusion on what exactly to do with him. Around this time, fellow slasher Freddy Krueger was achieving monumental success, becoming a pop culture icon seemingly overnight, with his biggest film yet just around the corner. It seemed Jason's time at the top was beginning to fade. One pitch for the 7th film, that surely would have been a shot in the arm, was to pit Jason against the Dream Demon himself, but Paramount and New Line Cinema, the house that Freddy built, couldn't agree to a financing agreement, and the project quickly lost any momentum. An alternate but equally worthy foe for the Crystal Lake Killer was presented by screenwriter Daryl Haney, who suggested what was essentially Jason vs. Carrie, in which the masked killer would face off against a teenage girl with psychokinetic powers. And so, Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood, was released in 1987, directed by John Carl Buechler, from a screenplay by Daryl Haney. The film opens similarly to Part 4, with a general recap of the franchise's history up until now, with emphasis on the events of Jason Lives, showing how Tommy managed to trap Jason under the lake. And in this film's recap, there is a noticeable lack of any Part 5 footage. But to be completely fair, it could simply be explained by saying this recap is about Jason's story, not Tommy's. Sharp-eared listeners may have realized this already, but the recap features narration from Walt Gorney, who played Crazy Ralph in the first 2 films. I'll play the audio in its entirety for you now.
There's a legend round here. A killer buried, but not dead. A curse on Crystal Lake. A death curse. Jason Voorhees' curse. They say he died as a boy, but he keeps coming back. Few have seen him and lived. Some have even tried to stop him. No one can. People forget. He's down there, waiting.
This is followed by archival footage of Tommy and Jason Lives giving these lines.
Jason's alive. He's even more powerful now.
The new blood ups the ante in ways that would forever change it, and Jason. What was once an abstract metaphor, the drunk ramblings of a town loony, is now franchise canon. There is a curse on Crystal Lake, and there is a curse that keeps bringing Jason back to life. A death curse. And Jason is the embodiment of this curse, or possibly even the cause of it. It's not clear. But what is clear is that he can't or won't die. The recap ends with Jason trapped under the lake as we last saw him, and the film cuts to sometime in the future, just outside of the Shepard household, where a very young Tina Shepard witnesses her father hit her mother in a drunken rage. She flees the house and takes a small motorboat out onto the lake. Her father chases after, but Tina's grief and frustration get the better of her, and she lashes out with some telekinetic force, ripping apart the dock and inadvertently killing him. All the while, Jason lies dormant within the iron necklace not far away. Tina then wakes up in the passenger seat of a 4-door en route to Crystal Lake, now a young woman. Naturally, we're given zero frame of reference for when all of this time skipping is happening. When is the flashback taking place? Is it a flashback at all, or just a nightmare Tina was having like how Part 5 opened? Jason looks pretty clean here, compared to how we'll see him again later in the film, so we have to assume that this occurred not long after Jason Lives. That's really all we get, that this is after Part 6. We'll circle back to the timeline placement at the end of the chapter, I promise, but I can at least say that Tina is 16 in the present day, while being between 10 to 12 in the flashback depending on which script you're going off of. Our only silver lining to this never-ending continuity cock tease is that we do see a calendar outside of the Shepard household, and it shows the opening takes place on an October Friday the 13th. We'll jot down what we can for now and circle back later. Carrying on, Tina is returning to her childhood home along the Crystal Lake shore, accompanied by her mother and her psychiatrist, Dr. Cruz. On the way, we see a sign for Crystal Lake. I guess Forest Green didn't stick. We'll touch on it in a later chapter, but we do see the town eventually come to embrace their bloody history rather than run from it, and there are real-life examples of towns changing their names only to change it back, typically for publicity stunts. So this really isn't a plot hole, just lazy writing that got lucky. Besides, have you seen the folks over at the convenience store? They're a suspicious lot, those Crystal Lakers. The Camp Forest Green massacre, in my opinion, would be enough to have the superstitious locals go back to using the old name for fear of further retribution. But really, that's just my speculation. We learn the home next door is being rented out by some partying teens, just like in Part 4. Except these teens are far less developed and come off like a checklist of 80s teen tropes. We've got Maddie, the ugly duckling, Robin, the hot girl, Eddie, the dweeb sci-fi writer, David, the greaser. Why does Crystal Lake have so many bikers and greasers and punks anyway? We've also got 2 horny couples, Russell and Sandra, and Ben and Kate. And finally, there's Tina's love interest, Nick, the vapid cunt everyone loves to hate, Melissa, as well as nearby campers Dan and Judy, and lastly, a couple who are gutted on their way to the party cabin, Jane and Michael. While the teens next door enjoy themselves, Tina is forced to perform her telekinesis on camera for Dr. Cruz, and it's obvious she's being exploited for either fame or money, and later on in the film, it's even revealed he's gaslighting her. This guy makes Malcolm McDowell's Dr. Loomis look like a saint. While frustrated with her lack of any real progress, Tina goes out at night to the lake shore and reaches out telekinetically for her father's presence, but she ends up feeling Jason's instead. And in her attempt to revive her father, she severs the chains holding Jason down there, and he rises to the surface once more. Tina sees his horrifying rotten body and blacks out. though curiously, he doesn't see her. Jason trudges out from the lake, his anger born anew, his killing spree set to resume. One thing we didn't discuss in part 1 of Under the Lake, at least not in any great detail, is how exactly Tommy manages to keep Jason down there. Now, yes, Megan did manage to snap Jason's neck and tear into it with the boat's motor, which theoretically could paralyze him from the neck down and keep him submerged. I mean, that doesn't really make sense for an undead zombie who can tank bullets and blades to the brain already, but you can still see the logic if you squint hard enough. But regardless of how you scrutinize the writing, you can't deny that the way they beat Jason is through ritual practice rather than brute force. Tommy didn't go out and buy special chains. They're completely normal, just imbued with power through the act of returning this cursed creature to the lake where he originally died. That's the entire point of him reading through those books on the occult, and it's what McLaughlin was referring to when he said he wanted to expand the mythology and tie it back to the original film. And it's what Buechler wanted to invoke through the film's opening monologue. If you're of a Christian persuasion, like McLaughlin, you may even see the finale of Jason Lives as being possible due to the little girl praying to God for help, and God answering that prayer by blessing the chains. Through ritual, through the symbolic placement of heavy chains around Jason's neck and a lake of fire, Jason is sent into a dark abyss to float in stasis for an indeterminate amount of time, which is not unlike what happened to the devil himself, according to Revelations 20:1-3. And I saw an angel coming down out of heaven, having the key to the abyss, and holding in his hand a great chain. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil, or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. He threw him into the abyss, and locked and sealed it over him, to keep him from deceiving the nations any more until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be set free for a short time. The imagery is almost too on the nose. While Jason may not be the devil himself, it's hard to ignore the similarities in the portrayal of evil here, especially knowing McLaughlin intentionally added these Christian undertones to the film. In fact, the messaging was so on the nose that it made John Shepherd, Tommy's actor from Part 5, who was a devout Christian, actually consider returning for Part 6, despite largely being disappointed with his time on Part 5. What a world that would have been.
Run! He'll kill you!
Jason?
Listen to me! Run! No! Tommy, get up! Get
Jason?
up! Listen! Oh, Tommy, no!
So much in the same way a piece of wood in the shape of a cross can hurt a vampire due to God's holiness, so too can iron chains keep Jason trapped beneath the icy cold waters of Crystal Lake. And upon breaking the chains, Tina unknowingly freed the devil. It's like a gothic horror story. Darkly beautiful, but also shows the true power of Tina's telekinesis, that she can, free the devil. Anyways, Jason starts mowing down the side characters, first with the couple Jane and Michael that I mentioned earlier. Mike is the birthday boy for the party in the vacant house, and Nick's cousin. Nick invites Tina over to the party, but she runs off when she experiences a vision of Jason killing Mike just moments ago with a camp tent stake. This is how we learn that Tina's powers also include visions of some kind. She later sees the murder weapon dug into her home's porch, but when she tries to show her mother and Dr. Cruz, it's mysteriously gone, further fueling her downward spiral. To end the night, Jason kills 2 nearby campers, Dan and Judy. The following day, Nick and Tina grow closer, but by night, Tina reveals her vision to him, and the pair realize Nick's cousin, Michael, is who Tina saw in her vision. The pair intend to search for him. Meanwhile, Dr. Cruz is revealed to have hidden the camp tent stake from Tina, but it's not revealed where the stake came from, since the actual stake used to kill Michael is nearby his body in the woods and covered in his blood, and Dr. Cruz finds it not long after he leaves the house, which he only does after he contemplates the other stake. I've watched this movie like 50 times, and I can't really figure out where exactly this stake comes from. Jason wasn't even nearby. Do they expect me to think he murked Mike with one stake, ran over to the middle of these 2 houses to just stab another stake into the wall, then ran off again before Tina could run out and see him again? Ms. Shepherd finds the stake in Cruz's desk and watches the tapes of his session with Tina and realizes the man is using his daughter, so she confronts him. Tina overhears the whole thing, including Dr. Cruz threatening to have her institutionalized again, and she steals her mother's car to run away. Unfortunately, she doesn't get very far before she sees another vision of Jason stabbing someone, this time her mother, which causes her to crash. Is what Tina is seeing real? It's hard to say, we know her mom is fine back at the house, so this must be a premonition, if anything, not unlike the types of supernatural occurrences Alice and Chris had about their fates. Tina runs home to check on her mom. Nick follows closely behind her, having tracked her down in the woods. Dr. Cruz and Miss Shepard follow Tina into the woods after finding the crashed car, and Jason kills Maddie, Ben, and Kate. Tina rummages through the doctor's desk at her house and finds the stake, and realizes she's been played. She also finds a gun, and hilariously pushes it off onto Nick, which is a small detail I've always loved. She's a human weapon herself, yet uncomfortable touching a sidearm. Like, girl, be serious. She also finds some newspaper clippings, this series' favorite exposition medium. The headlines read, "Mass Murderer at Camp Crystal Lake," and "Killer at Crystal Lake, Body Never Recovered." We're never shown the actual articles, but we know they divulge some of the town's history as Tina learns of Jason's name here. Jason does in David, Eddie, and Robin while Melissa sneaks out of the house. Nick leaves Tina alone in her home while he runs off to search for others for help, while Jason chases down Miss Shepard and Dr. Cruz in the woods. Okay, so no offense to anyone who likes the New Blood, but most of this plot is just X character ran here and Y character ran here, over and over. So let me just give you the most important plot beats. Dr. Cruz gets Miss Shepard killed, then is himself killed in the woods. Tina finds her mother's body, then confronts Jason for the first time, using vines to drag him into a puddle before electrocuting him with a power line. But of course, that's not going to stop Mama's boy. He chases her into the party house, where the pair have a quick game of cat and mouse before she brings the porch down on him. Tina reunites with Nick and Melissa, but Jason follows her over, sinking an axe deep into Melissa's stupid face with a swing that would have impressed Chris from Part 3. Tina and Jason face off, mental might versus brute strength, and he nearly snaps Nick in half when Tina gets the bright idea to go after the only thing Jason loves besides his mama, his mask. She splits it in half, and for the first time ever, we get a full climax with unmasked Jason, and he looks incredible.
Phrasing?
Their fight spills into the basement, where Tina sets Jason on fire. For the first time in his life. Which leads to the house fucking exploding. And the day is saved. Nick and Tina embrace and grieve over their losses. No, of course not. Jason survived the explosion and mysteriously appears behind them. #Jason teleports. This is when Tina reaches out to her father once more, this time asking for help, and his body actually surfaces from the water, incapacitates Jason, binds him with those pesky chains again, and yanks that sumbitch back down to the cold, cold depths of Crystal Lake like it's the fucking ending of Drag Me Down. So, let's recap. Let's really discuss what this movie just gave us. Crystal Lake? Cursed. Jason Voorhees? Can't die, Lake won't let him. Souls? Seem to exist. Telekinetics? They walk among us. Necromancy? Yeah, we've got that too. And again, notice how it's just the act of binding Jason to the lake floor that contains him. Tina does absolutely nothing to physically incapacitate him as we see in a traditional Friday film. And it's not like her dad is Jason Strong, why would he be? In the morning, firefighters put out the leftover blaze, and Tina and Nick are carted away to live happily ever after. We even get a final look at Jason's mask, split in two. I'm sure that's not going to cause any complications for the sequel. And that's The New Blood. So when does it take place? Well, unlike many of the Friday films, we've got two gaps we need to calculate for. An external gap between Jason Lives and The New Blood, and an internal gap between the prologue and the main story. An early draft of The New Blood states Jason had been rotting under the lake for 7 years by the time Tina is 12, before skipping ahead another 4 years to when she's 16, making for a total of 11 years between Jason Lives and The New Blood. But later script revisions would drop the 7 years bit entirely and only provide the internal gap of 4 years, with no other time frames mentioned. In Crystal Lake Memories, John Carl Buechler said this: "I was absolutely aware and appreciative of the Friday the 13th timeline, something that may not have been the case in the other films. Jason was dead for 10 years before our movie began, and that was when Tina was supposed to be a little girl. So how many years have advanced since? Let's say she was 10 years old and now she's 16. That's the way I balanced it." Now, those watching at home already know I'm not a big fan of Word of God, aka clarifying statements made about vague or ill-defined story materials outside of the story in question. They're helpful when things are ambiguous, but they should never be taken as absolute fact and definitely shouldn't be used to argue with other fans. Taking this comment at face value, if Jason had been under the lake for 10 years prior to The New Blood's opening, and then the film jumps forward 6 years later to when Tina's 16, we'd be set in 2004 at the absolute earliest. And that really can't be the case, as The New Blood is arguably the most 80s looking Friday the 13th film. And obviously that was not the film's intent to be set in a future that distant. but it does seem to be that their intent was a gap of about 6 years between the film's opening and its present-day storyline, depending on whether you're going off the shooting script or interviews. Even if we put our tinfoil hats on and interpret this comment to mean that Jason was simply dead for 10 years prior to the film's opening, not under the lake for 10 years, then that would still put us into the late 90s. No matter how you cut it, it doesn't work to leave a time gap between the two films. For contemporary sources on the timeline, we can look to Fangoria issue number 74, where one of the FX team members says Jason's design in the film is based around being underwater for 6 years. This is followed by Lar Park Lincoln, who played Tina, providing a corroborating statement about this time gap. Quote, "Tina's very smart, very strong. She's been in an institution for 6 years, and she's dealing with something so horrible that happened in her childhood that it's a major thing just to be alive and walking afterwards." So the only thing that fuels any speculation about whether or not Jason was in the lake for years and years before Tina was a little girl is John Carl Buechler's statements he gave in interviews after the fact, which stem from very early drafts of the script, which he worked on alongside Daryl Haney, and which were removed in later revisions and never made it to tape. Naturally, he envisions it differently than the final product when he worked on the initial premise. Public statements from the crew at the time only acknowledged the internal gap, meaning this was info that the production crew wanted you to know going into the film, which in my opinion holds more weight than comments made after the fact. Additionally, the press kits for the film, given to magazines and newspapers, only mention Tina returning to Crystal Lake after 6 years. They make no mention of Jason having been under the lake for years before that. And keep in mind that the actual film only shows Jason in 2 states, his clean Jason Lives state and his rotted New Blood state. The clean state is only ever used for that one scene, bridging the two narratives, so the obvious implication any viewer would have upon watching the films in order is that we're seeing Jason directly after the ending to Jason Lives. This, to me, comes across like the production crew having to condense the 2 time gaps into one for practical reasons, as has happened to most Friday the 13th sequels, unfortunately. So then, hear me out. What if this is the same night as this? October 13th is the same date we already came up with for Part 6 for reasons outside of anything from Part 7, which seems like the universe is giving us a freebie. Now take into account Tina not knowing who Jason is. We know, thanks to Lincoln's statements, that her father's death is what began her very long road with hospitalization. Tina kills her father on the same horribly unlucky Friday the 13th that Tommy Jarvis accidentally resurrects Jason and returns him to the lake. Then she gets carted off to hospital after hospital, and only now, 6 years later, has she returned to her childhood home. It explains why she's not familiar with Jason. She's been cut off from her community and all local news. But her doctor, who would have still been a grown man when Jason killed those kids in '84, not only knows about Jason, but has newspaper clippings about him in his desk. I'm sorry for any teasing I gave Roy. Crystal Lakers really do just keep this shit around like they're happy memories. Now I know some of you are scoffing, guffawing, and humbugging at this implication, but come on. Remember why we have these timeline discussions in the first place, because of the absurd time skips that push the series further and further into the future with no regard to continuity. And remember our goal of creating the most meaningful and satisfactory timeline possible? Well, tell me this isn't satisfying. And I'm setting the present day storyline in October simply because it gives us a nice round 6 years after the opening and provides more personal meaning to her journey back home. Plus, I don't know if you've noticed, but the films keep moving closer to a colder aesthetic, and it really doesn't let up until the remake. As for the year of 1996, while I really wanted to set young Tina as 12 like she is in some iterations of the script, and like the actress was in real life, primarily to make the present day story set in 1994 and give us more breathing room, I can't ignore that 3 separate cast and crew members made public statements about the gap being 6 years, and that's what is stated on the official press kit release. And we know Tina is definitively 16 because we've got 3 sources that corroborate that: the actress, the director, and the shooting script. So, working backwards from the concrete fact that she's 16 in the present day, she'd be 10 in the flashback. Despite a bold attempt at something new, Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, would continue the franchise's trend of declining ticket sales, and would face harsh criticism when compared to its predecessors. This, coupled with the TV show's surprise success, brought on a notion at Paramount that perhaps it was time to put Jason to rest, even if only for a little while. The studio picked Rob Hedden, one of the directors on Friday the 13th, the series, to pitch the last sequel. Rob gave 2 takes that would put Jason outside of his comfort zone. One where he'd be killing on a cruise, and another where he'd be stalking the urban jungle. After a short deliberation, it was decided to lump these 2 takes into one film. And so, Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, was released in 1989, written and directed by Rob Hedden. The film opens unlike any other Friday the 13th, first with a new audio motif, and second with an opening montage of the grimy streets and subways of New York City, set to the film's theme, Darkest Side of the Night. Nowhere in this montage do we get any clues to the gap from the last film to now, a problem that has plagued every Friday the 13th film beginning with Part 5, and something I'm sure you're sick of hearing me say by now. We then transition to good old Camp Crystal Lake, which looks to be in disrepair after having been restored to its original name, as we meet 2 lovers on a boat, Jimmy and Susie. And because it wouldn't be a Friday the 13th film without confusing timeline shenanigans happening in the first 10 minutes, Jimmy gets all nervous being near the camp where the murders happen, and he starts telling Susie about the story of Jason, and we're told Jason drowned about 30 years ago. If you're like me, your lorekeeper alarm is going off. Jason drowned in 1957, told to us by truck driver Enos all the way back in the original film. About 30 years later can be anywhere from 28 to 32 years, meaning a range from 1985 to 1989. The film may have come out in 89, but it's supposed to be set after Jason Lives and The New Blood, which means for our purposes it can't occur any earlier than 1996. And despite my best efforts, there really isn't any way around this line unless we're being very liberal and say that 40 years is almost 30 years, or if we assume Jimmy is a little stoned and got his story wrong. I mean, we don't disregard Columbus's journals just because he kept mistakenly calling America Asia, do we? Let's cut Jimmy some slack. Anyway, we're shown flashbacks to Jason's drowning, and you'll notice that Jason is literally just a normal child here with hair. But everything else we're told checks out. Pamela killed some counselors, but got her head lopped off. Jason then started coming back, and kept coming back. That's when we finally get a glimpse at our old friend, who is wedged under the wreckage from the last film, and wrapped up in his chains. Not sure where he got those new gloves, though. As Jimmy and Susie get intimate, the boat's anchor catches a power line running along the lake floor, and I guess rips through its rubber coating, causing the water to become electrified, which powers up Jason, allowing him to free himself from his chains. At first glance, you might think the opening makes no sense with established mythology, and I would have agreed with you a year ago. But ever since I took up this task of piecing together a better timeline that the fans deserve, I've actually come to really appreciate this opening, even if it's trite, simply because I kinda like how it does blend the mythologies of the last 2 films. The last 2 times Jason was defeated, it was simply the chains being put on him and being put into the lake that neutralized him, right? And if the chains can bind him, it stands to reason he can't take them off himself. It would defeat the ritualistic nature of the binding, and of course, we'd have seen him do it at some point. But remember what Tommy does in Part 6? He resurrects Jason with lightning. Accidentally, of course, but recall what he tells Sheriff Garris.
He's even more powerful.
Jason has risen from the dead before, long before Tommy dug him up. Twice, in fact, since we know that he died as a child in the lake. And while there's an obvious power increase from child to adult, the increase from Part 3 to Part 4 is negligible. The only real difference is he no longer seems to react to pain, at least not as severely as before. But Jason Lives turned him into a superhero landing, metal warping, backbreaking, lake floor treading fairy tale monster. He's at comic book supervillain power levels now. The main difference with that resurrection? Yeah, the lightning. My thoughts too. So, assuming a second resurrection via lightning would increase his strength like the first one did, I'm fine accepting that a second power increase could make him strong enough to remove the chains by himself, overriding whatever divine powers are working against him. After all, we literally see him throwing his shackles back down into the water while he laughs victoriously. No, I'm not kidding. Have a listen. Jason gets on the boat just as Jimmy uses a hockey mask to scare Susie. And yeah, this is how the film explains away Jason getting a new mask. And oddly enough, it has this axe notch in the forehead, so I guess this is like specifically a Jason Voorhees replica mask, and whoever made it got the chevrons wrong. Probably got it at the same store Roy got his mask, and the folks at Horror Inc. got theirs. Jason makes quick work of the pair, and we move into the story proper. The graduating class at Lakeview High is being whisked away via cruise liner to go see the Big Apple, a final celebration before the high school closes. It's never stated why the school is closing, but I always took it to mean that the town is dying and people are leaving. Not to get ahead of myself, but the director was very cognizant of needing to compete with Nightmare on Elm Street, and a character later on in the film refers to the graduating class as, quote, the last of them, when stating how Jason is going to get them. So I have a sneaking suspicion that there was some subtle implication that Jason was wiping out the entire teenage population, leading to the school's closure. As the students climb aboard, we meet our protagonists, seniors Rennie and Sean, as well as teachers Miss Van Dusen and Mr. McCulloch. Sean is the cruise ship captain's son, Rennie is his girlfriend, Miss Van Dusen is their lit teacher, and Mr. McCulloch is the bio teacher, as well as Rennie's uncle and legal guardian. Oh, and Rennie is afraid of water. And she's the only person in the entire Friday the 13th franchise who is afraid of water. Also, holy shit, look at how fucking massive they made Crystal Lake. Well, okay, this isn't actually Crystal Lake as much as fans think it is. As Timu Crazy Ralph tells us later in the film, Crystal Lake lets out into a river, which leads into this bay. This film at no point ever depicts a cruise liner in Crystal Lake. It doesn't explain how Trish and Miss Jarvis managed to hike around Crystal Lake, but fuck man, we can just assume there's a bridge over the river. If that's your idea of a deal-breaking plot hole, Friday the 13th may not be the right franchise for you. The important thing is that Crystal Lake connecting to the ocean in general is clearly a retcon, since its inclusion is to give this new info to the viewer. Jason, of course, stows away aboard the cruise liner. Rennie and Sean try to relax on their vacation, and we start to meet the secondary cast that will make up the majority of the film's body count. We've got Wayne, the AV kid, JJ, the rocker. Oh, now she's dead. Something tells me the side characters in this one get even less screen time than in the New Blood. Also, Jason teleports here. Like, we're not even going to debate this. This is right up there with Michael Myers and Corey Cunningham directly vanishing in front of people. You can't tell me this is anything other than supernatural teleportation, and it's perfectly in line with the Jason who is even more powerful. Immediately after this, we get a very intriguing scene wherein Jason passes by the window to Rennie's room, which causes Rennie to hear a child calling out. When she approaches the window, she sees a vision of a young boy, the normal Jason variant, drowning and begging for help. Her dog, Toby, seemingly sees this too, and runs off. With zero time to process the most confusing thing we've ever seen in a Friday the 13th film, we're introduced to Julius, an aspiring boxing champ, as well as Tamara and Eva, the queen bee and her sidekick, who are perving on the boxers. While Rennie looks for her dog, and our other teens get into trouble with the teachers, Jason is just going from room to room, silently dispatching everyone else. On the top deck, Tamara knocks Rennie into the waters below, which is honestly really dangerous, especially when she knows Rennie has a fear of water and likely can't swim. In the water, Rennie gets pulled down by the same ghost Jason she saw through her window earlier. After she's rescued, she goes to clean up in the bathroom, and we get the most complicated FX shot of the film. This bizarre scene in which the tap water turns to blood, and Ghost Jason reaches out from behind the mirror and chokes Rennie while begging for her help. And for some reason, this version of Kid Jason does have the physical deformity now, except he also has a thick head of black hair. I'm not sure why the design for Child Jason is being changed halfway through the movie. Of course, this hallucination fades, and Rennie is left wondering what's real and what's just in her head. But would either really give a satisfactory answer to what the fuck we just saw? It's important to note that this was 1989, and supernatural slashers were all the rage. These were direct attempts at capitalizing on that trend. Jason kills Tamara next, but not before she and Wayne blackmail Mr. McCulloch. Then he takes out the captain and his first mate, which Rennie and Sean find not long after. Sean calls the remaining students to the bridge to discuss the emergency, and that's where Timu Crazy Ralph tells everyone that Jason has returned. This leads to the remaining teens arming themselves and storming the ship looking for Jason, which is honestly a breath of fresh air. Wayne eats it next. Jason tosses him into a control panel that electrocutes him, but not before Wayne accidentally shoots the last deckhand aboard the ship. A fire starts, and Jason, funnily enough, pulls the fire alarm. Then Miles is next, and his death is as boring as his character. The only notable thing here is Jason very clearly teleporting. # Jason teleports. Julius runs up on Jason, but gets tossed into the ocean, and he's never seen again. Rennie sees yet another vision of Jason, this time coated in slime, and is nearly grabbed through the window by him until she sticks Stephen King's pen through Jason's eye. The aforementioned fire spreads to the engine, causing an explosion, and the ship begins to sink, forcing the survivors to board a lifeboat, including Julius, who I guess was wading water that entire time. They spend what seems to be hours or maybe even days rowing until they make it to New York Harbor, where Rennie is kidnapped by 2 gangbangers at gunpoint, but Jason kills them before they can do anything. He gets Julius next in a rooftop boxing match, where the boxer loses his head in one swipe. Then he tracks the other 4 survivors down and kills the officer they were with. Rennie commandeers the cruiser, but has one final vision, this time seeing the actual child, Jason Voorhees, in front of her car, which causes her to crash, and Miss Van Dusen burns alive. This causes Rennie to remember why she's afraid of water, but don't let that distract you from the fact that Rennie basically killed Miss Van Dusen. Anyhow, when Rennie was young, McCulloch took her out onto Crystal Lake and pushed her in to teach her how to swim, but Rennie alleges she was pulled down by the real Jason Voorhees. This is why each vision of Ghost Jason has gotten more and more accurate to how he actually looked. She was slowly remembering that she'd seen Jason before when he was a child, but that makes no sense when you consider that in the very beginning of the film, when Jimmy is telling Susie about Jason, we see the normal variant. Jason drowns McCulloch in acid, then chases Rennie and Sean through the subway, where they fry him on the tracks. They resurface in Times Square, but again, Jason gives chase, and our first real look at New York is over as quickly as it came. He chases them through a small diner, then into the sewer system, where they finally manage to put an end to him by letting the nightly toxic waste purge get him, which I'm sure is a totally real New York thing. But not before Rennie splashes Jason in the face with toxic waste, forcing him to yank his mask off and give us what is considered the most disappointing Jason unmasking in the franchise. Meet Pumpkin Face. No relation. I don't want to dwell on it, but 2 things I'd like to point out. 1, Jason is fucking screaming in pain here, and we don't talk about that enough. And 2, the goal with this scene, per the filmmakers, was that you don't actually see what his face really looks like, because by the time he's yanking off the mask, his face is already in the process of melting. What you're seeing is the smeared, melted face doused with toxic waste. And if we're being honest, I kinda like it. Anything that makes undead Jason look like a rotting corpse is fine in my book, since that's what he is. He's hamburger meat in a hockey mask. As the toxic waste comes flooding in, Spirit Jason can be heard begging for his mother's help. The torrent takes him, and his body begins to literally fall apart. We're shown clips of Jason screaming and drowning, undercut with his body melting, and lightning strikes overhead, signaling his death. All that's left is the spiritual essence of the child that drowned in Crystal Lake back in '57, an apparition that only Rennie can see due to the bond she'd made with Jason all those years ago in the lake. Sean, Rennie, and her dog Toby walk off into the sunrise. Jason is finally dead. Huh? What do you mean the ending's confusing? Okay, well, truth be told, I did have to read Rob Hedden's interviews from Fangoria and Crystal Lake Memories to really understand what the fuck was happening here, but what he says makes sense. Paramount told him they were ending the series and to do whatever he wanted, but to not totally write off Jason completely, in case it makes money. So, Rob decided, like McLaughlin before him, to tie it back into the original film by putting more emphasis on Jason having drowned in the lake as a child and creating a bit more mythology there for the character and how he behaves. His inner child is screaming to be freed from the horrific creature he's morphed into, and for some reason, Rennie can see this inner child's soul and hear its pleas when he's nearby, and that same inner child's soul exerts its influence on her in ways that seem physical to her, namely grabbing onto her or pulling her underwater. Does that sound familiar? Alice was pulled underwater by a child Jason, Ginny was pulled through a window by an adult Jason, and Chris was both pulled into the forest by an adult Jason and later pulled underwater by a rotting Pamela. Each one of these encounters felt real to the survivor, just like with Rennie. Chris even cites her encounter with Jason as entirely real and is confused about why her parents don't recall her storming out and why she wakes up in her bed with no memory of how she got there, like Alice in the hospital or Ginny on the stretcher. Everything Rennie experiences with Jason's supernatural presence directly mirrors each of those 3 original final girls and their run-ins with Ghost Jason, meaning those were the first occurrences of this psychic attack. And that's Jason Takes Manhattan. So when does this fall on our timeline? Well, we have literally no context for that, and I'm not joking, that's on purpose. The film opens per Mancuso Jr., quote, "in another time, another story." It's intentionally vague. The only time frame we're given is Jason drowning about 30 years ago, and Jason still being literally in the lake when Rennie was about 10 to 12, so 6 to 8 years prior to the film. And to really put us in a bind, for timeline purposes, most of the entire block of time that comprises about 30 years after Jason drowned, he's dead in the dirt, not in the lake, so the logic doesn't even work internally. You can't fudge it. So, okay, first things first, we have to relent and say that Jimmy was wrong. Jason died about 40 years ago, and he's just a little drunk and high and excited to get his rocks off. Second, we need to assume that this film is occurring not long after the New Blood because Rennie sees Jason in the lake at a time when he's actually under the lake, and Jason is only under the lake from 1990 to 1996, when Tommy puts him there and Tina has to put him back again. And you may be thinking, McCulloch only says Jason is still down there. He could just be reciting local legend and not commenting on Jason's literal whereabouts. After all, he's talking to a child and using the legend of Jason as encouragement to learn to swim. There's no reason to assume he objectively knows Jason is down there. But, dear viewer, I raise you this. Why else would Rennie have the connection to Jason no one else shares? Sure, Alice, Ginny, and Chris saw things too, but only Rennie interacts back with the hallucinations in meaningful ways, meaning she has some ability to exert influence on the hallucination, meaning it's a two-way relationship. This is why the film gives so much weight to her fear of water and why Rennie gets so angry and tells her uncle he was down there when she finally remembers why she has the fear in the first place. It's a classic example of connected all along, a plot twist trope wherein 2 characters have actually been related in some way the entire time. In this case, the twist is Rennie and Jason meeting all those years ago. So, what if we say the flashback is in 1991 and the present day story is 1997? We wedge it right into part 6 and 7. We'll keep a gap of 6 years to keep with the running theme of our protagonists having dual encounters with Jason 6 years apart, and we'll say that she's 17 here since she's graduating high school, yet still under McCulloch's legal care, and 11 in the film's opening to match the 6-year gap. Tommy returns in October 1990, but the town is called Forest Green. Kids are camping again, people are boating on the lake, and McCulloch even speaks about Jason in a neutral tone as if the story of his drowning has outlasted the story of his murders. Tommy accidentally resurrects Jason, then traps him within the lake to neutralize him. That same night, Tina accidentally drowns her father in Crystal Lake. Very shortly after this, in spring of 1991, Rennie goes out into the lake and is pushed in by her uncle, where she hallucinates a young Jason pulling her down, much like Alice Hardy in 1979. She develops some kind of bond with Jason here that would allow her to sense his presence in the modern day. Fast forward 5 years later, it's October 1996, Tina returns to town, and like Tommy before her, accidentally frees Jason, but fortunately, she's able to return him to the lake not long after. A few months later, in the spring of 1997, Jason is revived off the lake floor where he boards a cruise liner en route to New York to kill off the remainder of the Crystal Lake teens who are all graduating. Can we all agree to this? Because again, the alternative is to just say Jason Takes Manhattan isn't canon, which many people do, but I won't for a reason we'll bring up in the next chapter. Additionally, I'm placing Rennie's backstory in spring for the same reason I put the New Blood's modern day in October. That's when the other half of the story takes place, giving us a very clean, rounded 6 years with no carryover in months. After the disappointing box office return to the 8th entry, Jason would go on a hiatus while the rights to his franchise would trade hands. The specifics of the New Line deal are notoriously murky and hard to follow, even to this day, with a lot of misinformation floating around online. It honestly deserves its own video at some point. But for now, the gist is that Friday the 13th's new home going forward would be New Line Cinema, the same home of rival slasher Freddy Krueger. And though the reasons for the handoff were almost entirely to set up an eventual Freddy vs. Jason film, Wes Craven had made a surprise return to the franchise he started to tell the Dream Demon's final tale in Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which put the crossover film on the back burner. Sean Cunningham then thought, if Freddy can get one more film, then Jason can too. And so, Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, was released in 1993, directed by Adam Marcus from a screenplay by Dean Lorey. The film opens with our first real change. Instead of the Paramount logo, we get the objectively better New Line Cinema logo. Jokes aside, the film opens on the outskirts of Crystal Lake just moments before dusk. A lone woman hops out of her car and enters a cabin to settle in for the night and shower. When the power goes out, she's forced to investigate, and as you'd expect, Jason ambushes her.
Say the line!
Slasher.
This film gives us no context as to when it's taking place.
Yeah!
At least for the last few films, the lack of any concrete dates was made easier by the fact that each film at least picks up where the last one left off. Jason died at the end of 4, so he's buried at the start of 6. He's chained to a rock under the lake at the end of 6, so Tina finds him there at the start of 7. But recall, the last we saw of Jason in Part 8, he was melting down into nothing. So how in the crazy Ralph is he alive? We're not given a thing to go off of. Not yet, anyways. Jason chases the woman and grunts a lot while doing so, but it's revealed that it's actually an ambush for him for once. The woman is with the FBI, and this is all a sting to catch and kill him. With the undead killer right where they want him, the squad unloads hundreds of rounds into him, and they launch a mortar which tears his body to shreds. While this is happening, a mysterious man watches from the shadows. Following this opening, Jason's body parts are flown to an FBI facility in Youngstown, Ohio, where he undergoes an autopsy. One thing you'll be quick to notice compared to some of the other sequels is Jason's unique design this go around. Director Adam Marcus described it as being an evolution of the two best Jason designs in the series, the misshapen head from Part 2 and the exposed bones and rotten hamburger meat from Part 7. This is why, when the coroner details his extensive injuries, he lists the burn from Part 7. Many fans like to attribute the bubbles to the toxic waste from Part 8, but recall that the waste didn't boil or warp his skin, it just straight up dissolved him. As the coroner goes about inspecting Jason's heart, he's overcome with an insatiable urge to eat it, which leads to Jason possessing his body. He promptly kills a fellow coroner before savagely brutalizing 2 FBI agents off screen, one of which is played by Kane Hodder, the actor who has portrayed Jason in each film we've talked about today, and the only actor to portray Jason more than once. We then cut to an in-universe crime show, American Case File, which is picked up on the unfolding Jason story, and we're given our most comprehensive Jason lore drop so far. Per the host, Robert Campbell, Jason was born in 1946 to Pamela and Elias Voorhees and died when he was 11 in 1957. And he's committed a confirmed 83 murders, which by my estimations is off. Jason's total kill count should be 84 if we don't include Paul, and 85 if we do. I'll throw up all the names right now. I went over this list twice. I'm fairly certain these are all of Jason's kills. Anyways, as you can see, the tally is clearly factoring in Jason Takes Manhattan, which is why we're still assuming it's canon. Interestingly, he adds,
"For over 20 years, the mere mention of the name Jason Voorhees has been enough to send a shudder of fear through the hearts of an entire nation."
A confusing line. We'll get back to it at the end of this chapter. As part of the episode on Jason, Campbell speaks to a bounty hunter named Creighton Duke, the same man watching Jason's execution at the start of the film, and Duke explains that Jason can't be killed by conventional means like a mortal man. There's only one way to kill Jason for good, and only Duke knows how. Watching the report on TV is a young woman by the name of Diana, a waitress at a small diner in the town of Crystal Lake. My headcanon says this is intended to be the same diner Steve Christie visited in the original film. Also, this is what I was referring to when I said we'd see the town come to embrace their infamy. Jason is dead, 2-for-1 burger sale. They're actively inviting people to come back now that the undead killer is gone. Very meta. Duke is here visiting Diana, and he asks for her help in putting Jason down for good. Diana, of course, refuses, which causes a scene, leading to Duke being tossed in jail. As the scene dies down, we're introduced to our protagonist in the film, Stephen Freeman. He's the former lover of Diana's daughter, Jessica, and father of her grandson. And knowing her days are now numbered, Diana asks Stephen to meet her later that night so she may confess something to him about herself and her daughter. We also meet the rest of our extended cast here. We've got Sheriff Landis, Diana's beau, Officer Randy, Steven's friend, Vicky, another waitress and friend to Diana and Jessica, the owners of the diner, Joey B. and her husband Shelby B., and their son, Ward B. Demographically, the most unique Friday the 13th cast. En route to Diana's that night, Steven picks up a trio of campers hitchhiking to Crystal Lake to celebrate Jason's death. This is where we learn from Steven that they tore down the Camp Crystal Lake cabins a few years ago. Given that we just saw those cabins in the last film, this has to be a few years later. Jason, of course, comes by and wipes all 3 campers out. Afterwards, he kidnaps a police officer and murders the man's wife. The reason for the kidnapping is so he can transfer his body into the officer, for some reason. And bizarrely, Jason has the cop strapped to a table in stirrups to have his face clean shaven, which is just... why the fuck would Jason care if the guy has a mustache? Why does Jason know how to shave anyone? This is not a Michael Myers situation where you can assume he learned by observing. Homeboy does nothing but kill all day and is never chilling around normal people. Also, why are there stirrups on the table? And if that shit wasn't weird enough, the scene ends with Jason giving the dude a passionate kiss. Elsewhere, Diana gets a call from her daughter, Jessica, and we learn that she's dating Robert Campbell, the TV show host from earlier. This call is interrupted by Jason, now in the officer's body, who tries to kill her. Diana sees in the man's reflection that Jason is possessing him. She fends him off for a time, even managing to put a bullet in his head, but unfortunately, that's never stopped Jason before. Steven arrives just in time to save Diana from getting the same Voorhees kiss that Officer Josh here got, but she still gets a sharpening rod to the spine, killing her. Jason pulls a Michael Myers and flees into the night, and Steven is framed for her murder and arrested. Diana's death brings Jessica back to town, and she and Steven pass each other for a brief moment, and Steven learns that she's had a baby. I'm going to take this moment to comment on the film's police station set. While very gorgeously 90s, it's several times bigger than when we last saw it in Jason Lives, assuming this is meant to be the same building at all. Though, maybe we can just say in that film, what we saw was just the sheriff's office specifically, and here we're seeing the rest of the building. While in his cell, Steven is chatted up by Duke, who reveals he knows it was Jason who killed Diana. He offers his exclusive knowledge on how to kill Jason, for a price, one which Steven pays by having 2 fingers broken. The information he buys is this: Jason can only be killed by destroying his heart, and with Diana dead, there's only one person left who can do that: Jessica. The bodies Jason is currently hopping in won't last, as they are mortal and weak. He needs to be reborn into his original immortal body. And the most important bit of info: in a Voorhees he was born, through a Voorhees may he be reborn, and only by the hands of a Voorhees will he die. He has only 2 blood relatives left in the world. Diana was Jason's sister, Jessica is Jason's niece, and Stephanie his great-niece. This is what Jason wanted with Diana, and what he wants with Jessica: to be reborn fully into his original body, which the FBI destroyed. This is a massive bombshell. It's up there with learning Laurie Strode is Michael Myers' sister, or that Freddy Krueger has a daughter. Pamela states in the original film that Jason was her only child, and this film never clarifies if Diana and Jason share both parents or just one, so we can just assume Diana is his half-sister from Elias, and possibly even born out of an affair, hence not having her father's surname. Also, since Jason only has 2 living relatives, his father must be dead at this point. By saying only 2 blood relatives left, it, to me, implies that just recently he had 3 or more, possibly implying how he came back from dissolving in the New York sewers. Back at the diner, he sees his daughter for the first time, but Ward walks in on him, though it turns out he sympathizes with Steven and even tosses him his keys to help him escape town. Ward's a good kid. Steven then heads over to the Voorhees home, a decent-sized home out in the woods near Crystal Lake. Despite its grandeur, it appears in disrepair. Of course, we never seen any Voorhees house in the series besides Jason's little shack, which is somewhat surprising. It's hard to imagine Pamela being able to afford this home on a seasonal cook's salary, but I really enjoy the gothic sensibilities nonetheless. And come to think of it, if Voorhees is the surname of his father, then this would be his paternal family home. Inside the home, he finds an incredibly unique item: the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, the Book of the Dead. And it's not a blink and you'll miss it Easter egg either. He flips through the book in a shot nearly identical to the Evil Dead. We'll circle back to this later, I promise. While looking for evidence, Stephen learns that Robert Campbell is planning on staging the Voorhees home for his show, and he's even stolen Diana's body from the morgue with the intention of finding it on live TV to boost his show's ratings and further sell the idea that Jason is alive. Luckily, Jason, still in Officer Josh's body, bursts into the room and knocks Campbell around before fucking impregnating him like a facehugger. Oh boy, I mean, I really do like Jason Goes to Hell, but scenes like this remind me of why it's almost always put last in fan rankings. But the body transfer does lead to an incredible melting effect. Also, Campbell straight up calls Diana a Voorhees woman, so including Duke, that's two people who just happen to know her secret without ever having met her. Some secret. Jason leaves to find Jessica, and Stephen follows, managing to rescue her while critically injuring Jason's newest body. He tries to get Jessica to understand that Jason is after her, but she still thinks Stephen killed her mother and runs from him and goes to the police. Jason also arrives at the police station, where he accosts Jessica, but once again Stephen saves her. Now that Jessica knows the truth, the pair go to the diner to save their baby. Of course, Jason arrives and we get a very moody, slow-mo filled shootout where he kills Ward, the diner owners, and Vicky as well. Jessica finds a note from Duke, who somehow got to the diner before her or Jason? Very confusing. Anyways, the note says he has Stephanie and to meet him at the Voorhees house, alone. She ghosts Stephen, who finds the same note not long after. At the Voorhees house, Duke explains that his grudge against Jason is personal, but never says what happened. He tosses Jessica his knife, which in her hands transforms into something resembling the Kandarian dagger from Evil Dead, and he tells her only she can kill Jason, with that. Duke then hilariously falls into a trapdoor and impales his leg when two officers arrive, Sheriff Landis and Officer Randy. The latter proves to be possessed by Jason, despite speaking and acting like a normal person, which implies Jason can talk and act normal, but chooses not to. So I guess the shaving thing really is just his preference. The guy did grow up in the 50s, after all, so I guess it's lore accurate. Stephen arrives in time to slice Randy's neck open, revealing a small, demonic creature that attacks them before slithering into the home's basement. Once down there, he enters Diana's body and is reborn as his true self. Duke sacrifices himself by cuffing his wrist to Jason's and asks him, "You remember me?" buying the couple some time. In return, Jason squeezes him to death. Stephen and Jason fight across the front yard while Jessica retrieves the dagger, which she sinks into Jason's heart. This triggers a ball of light to illuminate the sky, which creates a pillar of light on top of him, and large demonic hands burst from the ground, pawing at him to pull him below. Stephen and Jessica share a kiss and walk off together into the sunset. And that's Jason Goes to Hell. So let's try and figure out where the film takes place. Yes, years before we had Godzilla and Kong cave paintings, the Justice League members in encrypted files, and Nick Fury standing in the dark. We had Freddy grabbing Jason's mask and pulling it down into hell. And though it would take a few more years for that film to come to fruition, this film's ending proved that it was inevitable. And more importantly, this scene actually gives us a big clue as to when this film takes place, but only when you couple it with the information given to us in Freddy vs. Jason. And we've got one more film to cover before we get there, so for now, let's just focus on what Jason Goes to Hell tells us by itself, which really boils down to these three facts. 1. Jason's design is meant to be the next logical step after the New Blood. His spine and finger bones are still visible, but now he's covered in burns. 2. He's killed 83 people, which more or less lines up with our established timeline so far, give or take a kid or two. 3. The name Jason Voorhees has struck fear into the hearts of Americans for over 20 years. We know that in-universe, Jason is recognized as the Crystal Lake Killer for the 1984 murders, so you might assume the line implies the film is set in 2004 or beyond, but recall that we also know Jason is a mythical figure before he commits the 1984 murders. Paul uses the legend of Jason as a way to scare his counselors, meaning it's a popular campfire story by 1984, and the story Paul tells is about the events of the original film. So the implication is that the legend began that night in 1979 and only continued to grow in popularity from there. Everyone knows the story of Alice seeing Jason. That's why when she disappeared, everyone knew who did it. Knowing this, we can say Jason has been striking fear into the hearts of Americans since August 1979, when the survivor of the Crystal Lake Massacre, who told authorities that Jason's rotten corpse rose from the lake to attack her, went missing from the apartment and left nothing but a trail of blood. This puts the film pretty strongly into post-Y2K territory, which is the earliest point in time that we could be over 20 years from 1979, while also fulfilling the fact that a few years have needed to pass since seeing the Crystal Lake cabins in Jason Takes Manhattan in 1997, because we know they've been torn down since, thanks to Steven. We'll keep it vague for now and call this the year 2000X. The opening to this film absolutely implies that Jason has been active for a stretch of time before the film begins, like when we found him all the way back in part 2. Of course, we're never explicitly told how Jason returns to his adult form after part 8, but fans with too much time on their hands may have already pieced together the disparate clues in the film's dialogue as to what likely happened. When we last saw Jason, his body was falling apart, literally inoperable. Sometime later, he's in his original body again, as evidenced by the battle damage. What we then go on to see in this film is Jason's body being torn to pieces, literally inoperable. Through taking control of human hosts to bring him into contact with a female blood relative, he's reborn into his original body, as evidenced by the battle damage. Halfway through the film, we're told Jason has only 2 relatives left in the world. The line delivery implying that Jason's source of resurrection is running thin. It's never directly stated in the movie, but we're meant to infer that he's only going after Diana and Jessica now because they're all that's left, meaning he already used someone to be reborn in the past, including after the New York incident. We know the film's intention is that Jason has done this before, as director Adam Marcus said in contemporary interviews that he wanted to answer how Jason comes back after being destroyed, and he's only been destroyed one time before now, in the New York sewers. Maybe that's why Diana is so sure Jason is coming for her before Duke even meets her. She knows she and her daughter are the last Voorheeses, which is why she's so urgent to speak to Steven. Ultimately, we're left to piece Jason's return entirely on our own, but if you pay attention and look closely, you'll see all the pieces are at least given to us. What we're not given an explanation for is how Duke even knows how to kill Jason. Where and when did he learn this? And at what point in time could he have had a run-in with Jason? Well, in an early script of the film, dated April 1992, we do get answers to some of these things. The script combines Duke's and Jason's backstories in a way that links them both to the Evil Dead. You remember the scene with Steven flipping through the Necronomicon? Fans today may view it as a fun Easter egg, but it was intended to be more than that. In the script, Steven learns of Diana and Jessica's heritage from the Book of the Dead, not from Duke. When he opens the book in the Voorhees home, he finds a Voorhees family tree drawn on the inside cover. Jason is there, of course, but on other branches connected via marriage are Diana and Jessica. Diana was born to an Anne Voorhees, not Pamela. Later in the script, Duke tells our leads that when he was a boy in the late 50s, he liked looking for trouble. Apparently familiar to the Crystal Lake area and aware of its supernatural nature, as well as knowing about Jason's recent drowning, he figured Crystal Lake plus dead kid equals something fucked up. And he was right. Within what the script calls the Voorhees family's ritual room, this room here with the stirrups, Duke spies on Elias and Pamela. The former is hacking open a young Jason's lifeless body to retrieve his heart. The latter is reading an incantation from the Necronomicon. Elias eats Jason's heart and becomes possessed by him, just like the coroner. And Pamela begins to use the Kandarian dagger on Elias, cutting into his neck. The rest happens off screen, and we only see Duke's horrified reactions. Duke describes seeing Jason's lifeless child body turn into a raging adult body that night. He stole the dagger not long after Pamela's death and has kept it ever since. Now, of course, this scene is not canon, as it did not make it into the finished film. What we did get was a brief "Remember Me." This is inherently different from his backstory in the script, since he doesn't interact with Jason at all there. He just watches from the window. And given that in the final film, Duke lets Jessica know that he doesn't need the bounty since it's personal, the new implication is that the two cross paths in their quote-unquote professional careers, not as children. And the only viable time frame for that would be sometime between August 1979 to June 1984, when he was roaming the woods after his mother's death, but before his ultimate demise at the hands of Tommy Jarvis. Every adventure he's had since then has ended not long after it began, and we, the viewer, are privy to almost all of it. There's the night of October 13th, 1990, when he was en route to Camp Forest Green from the cemetery. The weekend Tina resurrected him in 1996, where he mostly just wandered the woods, business as usual. And finally, the 3 nights in spring 1997, where he was on the Lazarus cruise liner, then in New York City. Regardless, all options require Duke to be in or around Crystal Lake, unless Jason wandered into him into the streets of New York, which feels unlikely. Given Duke is a widely renowned bounty hunter, we can assume he's been in his career for some time. It's possible that he was active between 79 to 84. I know a private eye and a bounty hunter aren't the same thing, but I've always imagined that Duke was hired by Alice's mother to find her and or track down Jason, which is what led him down the Voorhees rabbit hole. Speaking of, maybe that's why Jason constructs an altar for his mother's severed head in part 2. He's just going off what he knows from his childhood, but without the proper tools to revive her, i.e. the Necronomicon, nothing happens. Thank God. Maybe that's why he's fooled by Ginny. It's not that he's stupid, he was just already trying to revive his mother, and maybe he thought he succeeded. Headcanon, Pamela's severed floating head in the NES game, is what would happen if Jason did have the Necronomicon to revive her at that point. Oh shit, maybe that's why there were also zombies roaming around in that game. Anyways, I think the film's events, while not at all straightforward, are able to be deciphered, and in my opinion, they do tie into the overarching mythology of the franchise so far, if we're willing to play fast and loose with that mythology. It's not really Crystal Lake itself that is the supernatural beacon, it's Jason and his bloodline. This is what the narrator meant when he said,
Jason Voorhees' curse.
Jason himself is the curse on Crystal Lake. Jason's death curse is what plagues this area. He's the creature cursed to live at the lake forever, able to be reborn through his bloodline, but bound to death by it as well. I won't call him a Deadite, as many do, even if I do believe his return was tied to the Necronomicon, since that really ignores everything about Deadites and Jason, since the two entities share nothing in common. Deadites are sadistic, petty, mouthy, mischievous, and completely take over the host body. Jason is territorial, angry, spiteful, silent, patient, and he has complete agency of himself. The only connection between them is the Necronomicon, but we know it can do more than just summon Deadites, so there's no reason, in my opinion, to call him one. Let's recap what this film gives us for our timeline. There's an implication that something dark and twisted occurred at the Voorhees household decades ago. We're told that the Voorhees curse, a long-established plot element previously referred to as the death curse, revolves around Jason's cycle of rebirth through the Voorhees women. We see that the Necronomicon, a book of spells and curses, is on full display within the Voorhees household. We're told a blade similar in appearance to the Kandarian dagger, a counterpart/contingency weapon to the Necronomicon, is needed to end this Voorhees curse, and we see that the blade being held by a Voorhees can magically reveal its true ancient form. And lastly, consider what Steven asks Duke.
Duke, that part about being reborn through a Voorhees woman, does it have to be a living woman? Duke, that thing's in the basement with Jessica's mother.
Holy Mother of God.
With all that laid out, I'd like to do something a little different and present you with a theory, which I'm going to refer to for the time being as the Mother Vessel theory. After Jason's death, Pamela used the Necronomicon in some way to bring him back, but like anytime anyone tries to use the Book of the Dead, it backfires. Instead of bringing her child back to life in his body, it brings him back to life in her body, driving the woman mad. Now, of course, we know Jason can possess those who eat his heart, and we know in the original script, Elias was to eat his heart. So it's possible this is how he came to inhabit Pamela's body, or it could be as mundane as the Book of the Dead simply plopping him in there. Personally, I think it was the latter. I don't see Pamela eating Jason's heart. Regardless, Jason's soul inhabits his mother's body, which drives Pamela insane. Her speaking in Jason's voice in this context could be evidence of this possession. And for those who theorize Jason was helping his mother in the original film, explaining how a single middle-aged woman was able to perform such feats as tossing people through windows and stringing them up in trees, well, you can alternatively say she was strengthened by Jason possessing her, just as we see happen to the coroner, Officer Josh, and Robert Campbell when they're all possessed. For Jason, reuniting with his mother was all he wanted. He'd have no reason to use her body to return to his own. The boy loves his mother. She's the only person who he respects and listens to. He could stay there forever, as much as it hurts Pamela. So, once Pamela is beheaded, 3 things happen. The first is Jason uses her main body to be reborn into his own, in order to continue her legacy of death. He takes the rest of her, the clothing, her severed head, and flees into the night. The second is, possibly with vague memories of his own resurrection, he constructs an altar to his mother, hoping she too could be reborn like he was, unaware that the Necronomicon is what gave him this wicked curse. And third, finally, the following morning, his inner self lashes out at Alice while she's out on the lake, dragging her under the water like we'll see later happen to Rennie Wickham. This satisfies everything we saw in the early films and these new films, while sticking to the established lore embellishments in parts 6 through 8. And since this is my series, and since my goal has been to construct a timeline that Friday the 13th fans deserve, which irons out as many contradictions as possible, we're treating this theory, or the loose framework of it, as canon for the next 2 films, just as we're assuming part 5 is not canon to every film made afterward. I'm not going to rule out something as non-canon in a future movie if it doesn't fit with my theory, nothing like that, but the theory will be influencing how I interpret scenes going forward. After fans witnessed Freddy Krueger himself acknowledge the Crystal Lake Killer at the end of the final Friday, it seemed like Freddy vs. Jason would be just on the horizon. And yet, the film languished in development hell, prompting Sean Cunningham to grow increasingly upset with New Line Cinema and to put a new Friday the 13th film into production to keep Jason in the public's consciousness. And so, Jason X was released in 2002, directed by Jim Isaacs, from a screenplay by Todd Farmer. The film opens in what looks to be hell, with jagged rock formations, decayed foliage, crumbling gothic megastructures in the distance, and an all-consuming fire exploding everywhere. But as the camera pulls out, we discover that we're just deep in the bloodstream of Jason Voorhees. A fun way to transition from the previous film, but possibly evidence of his status as a demonically possessed, child-turned-lake creature. We see Jason strapped down to a table and being experimented on by people in lab coats, drawing blood, slicing him open. As we see, he's being held at the Crystal Lake Research Facility, and he's awaiting cryogenic suspension. Notably, Jason is looking rather fleshy and lively here. We're told he's being researched by an unnamed organization for his regenerative properties, which is something he very specifically does not have. We've seen tons of battle damage carried from film to film, very deliberately I might add. But we're told he can regenerate now, which is why he's being moved to another facility, despite our protagonist, Rowan's, complaints of the danger of transporting Jason Voorhees through open country. This might suggest why there's a Crystal Lake research facility in the first place. It was constructed around Jason, making containment much easier, but dialogue later on in the film throws this into question. It's never stated who's funding the research. It could be either federally funded, or it could be a private group with military contracts. We aren't told. Predictably, when they go to grab him, Jason's already escaped and waiting for them. Now armed with the tool that was once his damnation, he easily fucks up the guards, like a slasher John Wick 2 decades before Michael Myers did it. Jason teleports into the hallway to begin his chase with Rowan, and she manages to corner him into the cryogenic chamber. But Jason sinks his machete through the thick steel and stabs Rowan, which activates a safety protocol in the lab, locking the room with her inside. Sometime later, a crew of 6 enter the research facility, which has been long abandoned. These are our main characters alongside Rowan, Professor Lowe, students Sonoran, Azrael, Janessa, and the android KM-14, all of whom are being escorted by Private Kicker. They discover both Jason and Rowan and take them back to their ship, the Grendel, where we meet the rest of the core cast, Sergeant Brodsky, leader of the military escort, students Waylander, Kinsa, and Stoney, the pilot Lou, Professor Lowe's assistant Adrian, the engineer aboard the ship Crutch, and finally the rest of the military escort team, Privates Briggs, Dallas, Condor, Sven, and Gecko. On board the Grendel is technology capable of reviving Rowan in the form of nanoscopic robots they call ants, which repair organic tissue. Sure would be a shame if an undead slasher got their hands on this. Rowan comes to and learns she's slept until 2455, quote, over 400 years since her time. This means she's been asleep no later than 2054. Earlier in the film, KM points out that the model of cryochamber used on Jason was built in 2010, meaning the opening of the film couldn't occur any earlier than that. So we've got a range of 44 years for the opening of the film to occur. Immediately after, Professor Lowe speaks to a business partner he uses to move recovered Earth Prime artifacts and brings up his new finds. Rowan is worth nothing, but the partner recognizes the legend of Jason Voorhees, and we're told that Jason killed nearly 200 people, then vanished without a trace, becoming a timeless boogeyman like Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac Killer. Moving forward, no, we're not discussing the nipple scene. You can look it up on your own. We get a brief shot of Jason unmasked, and he's more or less what he should look like. Wonky left eye, fucked up teeth, axe wound. The only problem is that he's fleshy, he has hair, he has a nose. He seems to be alive again, like before Chris sunk the axe into his forehead. And yet, he's as strong as he was as an undead being, possibly even stronger. Something happened to Jason since we last saw him, but we don't know what. But whatever it was, it changed him, again. Kinsa and Stoney make love aboard the ship at the same time Jason is being autopsied in the medical room, which leads to him waking up, just like we saw in the final chapter. He kills Adrian in one of the most memorable Friday the 13th death scenes of all time that begins exploring the Grendel. Following this, we get a bit of exposition. Earth Prime, or Earth 1, can no longer sustain life. The oceans are dried up, the soil has turned to dust. Humans have since moved to a new home planet, Earth 2. We also finally get to learn who Rowan is a little bit. She was a project leader at Crystal Lake Research Facility. The project subject was Jason Voorhees. The facility had somehow gotten control of him before 2008 because their first attempt at executing him was held in 2008. Numerous methods were used: electrocution, lethal gas, firing squad, even hanging, but obviously no method worked. Duh, because only through a Voorhees can he be killed. We just learned this. The implication, whether intended or not, is that Crystal Lake Research housed many projects, and Jason was simply Rowan's project. If you'd like to look at it through a post-Scream meta-narrative lens, slashers have become so commonplace in the film landscape that even within a slasher franchise, these undead phenomena have become relatively common. Which, yeah, makes a lot of sense in this context. Tina exists, and she's a full-on Keter-class telekinetic with the ability to manipulate supernatural curses and the souls of the dead through sheer will. Jason was giving girls hallucinations all around the Crystal Lake area. And you know, this guy. Lots of supernatural shit was going on here. This scene also implies Jason was in captivity before 2008, since that date is only when they decided to execute him, which was only decided upon after the end of the project's study, when Rowan deemed Jason too dangerous to be kept alive. Given the nature of scientific study, Jason coming into captivity before 2008 is an almost required assumption. Here, Rowan learns that Jason is still aboard the ship and demands to see his body, which leads to the crew discovering Adrian's remains, and an emergency broadcast is issued to warn of the hostile on board. Meanwhile, Jason kills Stoney as he gets up to leave Kinsa's room. Roaming the ship, he also finds Azrael and Private Dallas playing a virtual reality game, and he kills the pair. Brodsky scrambles his soldiers, and they find Jason in the cargo bay and open fire, but he disappears from their line of sight like Corey in Halloween Ends. As they attempt to track him down, Jason kills Sven, then Condor, then Gecko, then Kicker, then Briggs, then Brodsky. As the Grendel comes out of hyperspace to board the Solaris space station, Jason kills Lou, leading to the ship to collide with the station at full speed. The destruction leads to an instability in the station, and it explodes, leaving the Grendel with no help. The survivors board themselves in the bridge, but it's not long before Jason finds his way in, killing Lowe in the process and taking back his machete. A plan is formed to escape the Grendel via the shuttle, meaning the group will have to split up and perform various tasks to prepare for the launch. During this, Rowan finds Brodsky, who's alive, but Jason interrupts their escape plan by killing Crutch. Kinsa, who's been spiraling the whole film after Stoney's death, locks herself in the shuttle and refuses to let anyone else in. In hysterics, she tries to launch and leave everyone behind, but with the fuel line still connected, all she manages to do is fly the shuttle directly into the ship, causing extensive damage. Just as all seems lost, Sonoran debuts his new and improved KM, outfitted with a shit ton of guns and upgraded to no hand-to-hand combat, which leads into a hilarious wirework sequence that feels so divorced from a Friday film that you can't help but laugh. And as awesome as the fight began, it quickly boils down to Jason stands and watches as KM shoots, kicks, and punches him. A real step down from the one-on-one tussle he had with Steven just a film ago, and that one wasn't even that good. Here, KM blows off Jason's right arm, his left leg, and finally blows his head open with a grenade, leaving his lifeless body leaning on the nanomachine table from earlier in the film. Yeah. The group lick their wounds, and another ship answers the distress call, but the Grendel's current condition makes a rescue impossible, so the survivors make a new plan to set explosive charges along the walkway between the two halves of the ship, severing the unstable part and making rescue possible. Back on the bridge, the nanite machine flickers on mysteriously, and they begin working on restoring Jason's body. And I'd like to point out that the film absolutely implies that Jason's evil is manipulating the ants in some way, as the ants determine there isn't enough organic matter to reconstruct his body, and the procedure is cancelled. However, Jason's evil overrides the abort command, and the ants instead reconstruct him using inorganic material from the surrounding ship. That's right, Jason is now a cyborg. This is Jason X, also known as Uber Jason. He's got a crispy metallic coating over top a soft, delicious human center, and a new chrome mask to boot. Bullets don't penetrate him, and KM's super strength no longer phases him. In fact, he takes her head off with one punch. The group are forced to leave Waylander behind, who sets off the charges, killing himself and sending Jason hurtling into the vacuum of space. Rescue arrives just as Jason begins tearing open the hull of the Grendel, which Janessa is forced through. Rowan, Brodsky, Sonoran, and KM's head manage to reach the rescue ship, but their side of the airlock is jammed. Thinking on his feet, Sonoran begins working to override the airlock, but it requires Brodsky to go on a spacewalk and rewire some things. Elsewhere on the ship, Jason casually rips down door after door looking for his prey. Just gonna take this moment to say that yes, this is Jason at his absolute peak of strength and endurance, with 3 doses of electricity, meaning 3 power-ups before his cybernetic upgrade. As he gets closer, Sonoran uses his ship's hollow technology and Rowan's knowledge of Jason's time period to construct an elaborate diversion to keep Jason preoccupied. This leads to a fun throwback to the early Friday films, complete with the classic musical motifs, where Jason explores Camp Crystal Lake circa 1980 and encounters 2 horny counselors. He beats the pair to death within their own sleeping bags, a callback to a similar death in The New Blood, just as the airlock doors are opened. But before he can reach Rowan and Sonoran, Brodsky returns and blocks his path. As the Grendel finally explodes, Sonoran, Rowan, and KM look on in horror from the safety of their rescuers, the Tiamat, as Jason flies through space directly for them. But thankfully, he's intercepted by Brodsky, who in his final act steers Jason towards Earth 2. As the 2 men burn up on re-entry, a pair of lovers by an unnamed lake mistake them for a shooting star. The pair kiss and watch as the star lands in the nearby lake and decide to go check it out. The star, we learn, is nothing more than the charred remnants of Jason's mask. The rest of him, we can deduce, is finally gone. And that's Jason X. I hadn't seen the film in a couple years before doing this timeline deep dive, and I have to be honest, I was pleasantly surprised. As a child who was ignorant to how movies were made, it was always one of my least favorite Fridays. But as an adult, with a healthy respect and appreciation for the art of filmmaking, especially knowing how nothing ever goes to plan, I actually have a lot of new love for this film. I believe director Jim Isaac said it best, that they were told to make a $30 million film with $15 million, and they did an amazing job. There's early use of CG that actually holds up really well, which is incredible given that almost every major VFX shot was worked on by no more than 4 or 5 people. It's about on par with Freddy vs. Jason, which was produced about 3 years later. Anyways, you may be shocked to find out that Jason X, the Friday film that pushes this series 400 years into the future, has surprisingly little issue fitting into our established timeline. In fact, our last timeline update was the final update for this film. And I glossed over it before, but in case anyone at home is bewildered by the decision to push Jason into the year 2455, New Line Cinema and Sean Cunningham's singular goal was to make Freddy vs. Jason, because they knew it would net them millions. Jason Goes to Hell was made solely to set up the pieces for such a film, by putting Jason in the same starting position as Freddy. With this in mind, when Freddy vs. Jason continued to stall further and further and Cunningham grew more and more impatient, it was decided that a new film would need to be made to keep up the cash flow, but it would also need to be set far enough in the future to avoid any inconsistencies with the crossover film. At long last, we've come to the final live-action film in the original Friday the 13th timeline. As I just mentioned, Sean Cunningham only came back to the franchise for personal gain, and only approached New Line Cinema with the prospects of making Freddy vs. Jason because he knew it would make a pretty penny. Jason Goes to Hell was then created to re-establish Jason to an audience who hadn't seen him in 5 years, but also to partially wash away the bad taste left by Jason Takes Manhattan, which was both the worst reviewed and lowest earning Friday until Jason X. But also, and maybe most importantly, to set up the pieces for the planned Freddy vs. Jason film. Both slashers would be dead at the film's start and firmly placed in hell, paving the way for an organic meetup. This was a common thread throughout almost every single script during the 10-year production time, that both killers were dead prior to the start. And so, Freddy vs. Jason was released in 2003, directed by Ronnie Yu, from a screenplay by screenwriting duo Mark Swift and Damian Shannon. The film opens in the boiler room of the infamous Springwood slasher, Freddy Krueger, as he catches us up to speed on who he is and what's been going on in his neck of the woods. He's a child killer, with the newspaper clippings to show it. These headlines look super fun to work into a timeline, but we're here for this boy. Not this boy, this boy. So we're ignoring all that. We learn Krueger had been caught by police, but was somehow let go, which led to a vigilante mob finding him and burning him alive. As he explains, he only became stronger in death, able to use the fear of the children to invade their dreams, where he can then kill from beyond the grave. But the town of Springwood would learn to counteract Krueger by erasing him from public consciousness completely, thus removing his ability to spread fear and invade dreams. This led him to search the bowels of hell for a solution, bringing him across someone who has spilled his equal share of guts and who can return Krueger's name to its proper glory. This person is none other than Jason Voorhees, evinced by his mask left abandoned in the dirt. This transitions us directly into a scene involving a young woman skinny dipping in Crystal Lake, date unknown. She becomes increasingly paranoid she's being watched, and in a panic, tries to run back to her cabin when Jason walks into view, ready to kill. Recall that the last we saw of Jason, in the present day storyline anyway, he was being dragged down to hell for eternity. Let's see how they explain how he returned to Earth this time. The counselor flees into the woods, but alas, they're Jason's woods, and he finds her and pins her to a tree with his machete. In the distance, he hears the soft voice of his mother calling to him from behind. She speaks to him like she hasn't seen him in ages, and reminds him of his death curse.
You cannot die. You can never die.
She tells him he's just been sleeping, and that now is the time for him to wake up. Somewhere in the same dark forest we saw a moment ago, a half-rotted corpse lays dormant, save for its large black heart which begins to beat once more. Then air fills an old pair of lungs, and as Pamela commands her son to rise and to march on Elm Street, a pair of eyes behind the hockey mask open and light up with activity. You already know what I'm going to say. The film gives us no context as to when it's taking place, though it at least ties back to both of the preceding films, Freddy's dead and Jason Goes to Hell. The Nightmare films haven't really had to worry about that, but this will be the first time since 1989 that a Jason movie has opened with Jason in the last place we left him. Now, how does Jason come back to life? If Jason had some kind of curse put on him when Pamela recited passages from the Necronomicon, and that curse allowed him to be reborn through a Voorhees woman, but also killed by one, then how could he come back now without a Voorhees woman? How can he come back at all if the curse was that another Voorhees could kill him permanently? At least, that's what Duke implied, that he knew how to kill Jason for good. But the actual prophecy he gives Steven simply states that only through a Voorhees can he be killed, and nowhere does that imply permanently. He's been killed no less than twice at this point. And Duke quotes it in such a way that you get the implication it was told to him like that, or he read it that way verbatim. But saying Duke was wrong feels like a cop-out. Let's look at it another way. If we're to take it at face value that the Friday the 13th universe can have chains that magically bind monsters and telekinetic girls who have visions of the past and future, then of course a dream-invading sleep demon isn't too far-fetched, yeah? Okay, well think back to how Tommy put Jason in the lake. Per whatever source Tommy got on the matter, it should have been a pretty final act. It was done to end Jason's reign of terror, and yet Tina manages to just break the chains a film later, albeit with an equally powerful supernatural gift of her own. But Jason and all of his brute strength couldn't take the tiny little chains off. Not to mention, Tina literally resurrects her father briefly at the end of the film. So it seems that when there is a strong enough supernatural force, the natural world order can be broken or overridden. When Jason is powered up via electricity in Part 8, he's able to free himself from the chains, a feat he unambiguously could not perform before, throwing them back down to the lake floor and proving that magical laws can be broken. It's essentially the same new weird genre logic that makes Superboy strong enough to punch and shatter reality, for those of you who are familiar with DC lore. This is pure comic book logic, which makes sense since slashers are like the dark counterpart to superheroes. So, if we can accept a telekinetic can undo the ritualistic imprisoning of a demon as well as reanimate the dead, even if for a moment, Can't we accept that a reality-warping planeswalker who feeds off the souls of humans can break Jason out of hell, even after he was put there as part of a curse from an eldritch book of evil? God, that's a sentence that no one in the history of the universe has ever said before. Anyways, where is this happening? Jason was sucked into the earth outside of his childhood home, in the front yard to be specific. We can see in the film that the area is a couple feet from the forest. We don't get many angles of this new, dark forested area. We're only shown him rising from the ground and leaving, but an early work print of the film did recreate the shot of Freddy yanking Jason's mask into hell, signifying that this is indeed meant to be the same area we saw in Jason Goes to Hell. The added foliage can be attributed to either the passage of time since that film or artistic license. The point is that we're seeing Jason's body rebuilding itself from the ground up, organs and all, in the last place we left him. Cut to title card, cue Spineshank's beginning of the end. The stage has been set. We move into the story proper and meet some of our main characters, Laurie Campbell and her friends Kia and Gib, who are having a sleepover at the Campbell house at 1428 Elm Street. Gib's boyfriend, Trey, and Trey's friend Blake arrive shortly after. We learn that Laurie's got a troubled past. Shortly after losing her mother to a car crash 4 years ago, her high school sweetheart, Will, left town without even so much as a letter. Not long into the sleepover, Jason sneaks into the home and guts Trey before snapping him and the bed in half. The teens run for help and stumble into Officer Stubbs, who calls in backup. They're taken to the police station and questioned individually to keep knowledge of Freddy from spreading, but not before Laurie happens to overhear his name being said by one of the officers, thus creating the fear of him that he needed to return to invading dreams. With Laurie's father out of town for the night, hence her home hosting the sleepover, she's forced to sleep at the police station, where she has her first nightmare of the film. The same child from the film's opening, in Freddy's boiler room, gives her a warning to tell her friends, Freddy's back, followed by a sneak peek of the man himself. Later that night, Jason kills Blake and Blake's father. We then move into Weston Hills, a locale familiar to Nightmare on Elm Street fans, where we meet Will Rollins, Laurie's sweetheart mentioned earlier, and Mark Davis, two Springwood teens who've both been institutionalized for the wrong reasons. Mark claims Freddy killed his brother 4 years ago. Will claims he saw Laurie's father kill her mother, and that the car crash story was a cover-up. Both boys claim to be telling the truth, but neither believes the other. Will happens to see a news report on the murder at Laurie's home, but the clerk shut the TV off before he can find out who died. Later that night, driven by his friend's obvious grief and frustration, Mark swipes a key card from an orderly, and the pair flee the hospital in the rain, back to Springwood. We can hear in the news report that the cops are treating the reporters like mushrooms, keeping them in the dark and feeding them shit, all in an attempt to obfuscate Krueger's existence. We also learn that both boys are routinely given a drug called Hypnosil while at Weston Hills, though we won't learn why for some time. The following morning, Laurie's father, Dr. Campbell, attempts to get her to take the same medicine, though she refuses. Exhausted from the night before, we can see she's still being haunted by Krueger, even in her microsleep. After she leaves to get ready for school, Sheriff Williams notifies Dr. Campbell that Mark and Will escaped Weston Hills, meaning he's the one behind the anti-Krueger campaign, or at least one of its designers. At school, Laurie reunites with her friends, only to find out that the police have pinned Trey's death on Blake, as well as Blake's father's murder, which the girls know to be a lie. This is also where we meet the nerd Linderman, who has a huge crush on Laurie, and the Jason Mewes look-alike Freeberg. Laurie continues to spiral, and a crowd forms around her as she tearfully describes her nightmare to Kia and Gib, which prompts Mark to reveal himself, reciting the hellish nursery rhyme from the nightmare and proving to Laurie that what she's experiencing is real. Will comes to her aid, but the shock of seeing him after 4 years causes Laurie to faint, and the two boys flee the school for the Springwood Library. There, Mark finds that extensive sections of the town's archives have been purged, including his own brother's obituary, all in an attempt to hide everything that could possibly be traced back to Krueger. It slowly dawns on Mark that this is how the town has been combating him for the past 4 years, by forgetting he ever existed and quarantining those still alive who know and fear him, meaning his outburst at the high school undoubtedly fucked up the town's plans and spread new fear to countless teenagers. With nowhere left to go, the pair decide to skip town, but not before Will can make sure Laurie is okay. That night, the Springwood teens throw a rave in the cornfield outside of town, where Laurie, Kia, and Gib go to unwind after the intense day they'd had. Will finds Laurie here, and the pair begin to discuss what's happened in the last 4 years, but are interrupted by the ongoing party. Meanwhile, Gib passes out in the cornfield and comes face to face with Freddy, and to make matters worse, in the waking world, she's being taken advantage of by a glowstick-adorned raver. Unlike with Blake, Freddy takes his time taunting Gib, as he's now strong enough to resume killing, thanks to Laurie and Mark's drama at the school. Unfortunately for Freddy, we're 11 films deep into the Friday the 13th franchise, and if there's anything I hope you all have learned in the last 3 hours, it's that Jason is good at killing kids. So naturally, when Jason stumbles upon the beast with 2 backs, his instincts kick in, and he skewers both Gibb and the Raver, killing them instantly and robbing Krueger of his honor. Not satisfied with just 2 dead teens, Jason sets his sights on the entire party. Now, keep in mind, the last time we saw our mama's boy, he was super strong. Yes, he was also peak human, or above peak human, as far back as part 2, but like Tommy said in Jason Lives,
he's even more powerful now.
And we certainly saw that through his insane feats of strength, like the RV kill, the entire beating he takes from Tina, or taking Julius's head off in one swipe. But this? Jason has set a light for the second time in his life, but rather than flail in pain, he shrugs it off completely. He moves forward with unwavering determination, with all the patience and time in the world, effortlessly slaughtering another 8 kids before we cut to our survivors fleeing in Mark's van. These are our main cast of survivors, which I will refer to as the Scooby Gang, for 2 very obvious reasons. Later that night, Will tells Laurie everything, how he saw her father take a knife to her mother in bed, and how he was institutionalized for going to the authorities about it by Dr. Campbell himself. She then confronts her father and learns that he does in fact work at Weston Hills, as Will claimed. Laurie flees into the night to be with Will, who decides to take her to Mark, the expert on all things Krueger. Unfortunately, Mark has both fallen asleep and fallen prey to the Dream Demon. At the Springwood police station, we learn Officer Stubbs has been tracking the case closely, and to his amazing credit, comes to the conclusion that the killer is directly copying Jason's MO. He's blown off by the sheriff though, who of course believes it's Krueger, but still, acknowledging canon is always nice. Anyway, Sheriff Williams says that their way of handling things has afforded them 4 years of peace, meaning that Jason Goes to Hell has to occur within those 4 years, otherwise Freddy would have no reason to appear at the end, right? On paper, yeah, but in the film's opening, Freddy says he had to search the bowels of hell for help, which is where he found Jason. This tells us 2 things. 1, Freddy had to search hell because that was the only place wherein he had influence. 2, Jason Goes to Hell's ending either didn't actually happen and is just a glorified to-be-continued stinger, or it occurs months to years later than the rest of the film, after Jason has been in hell for some time. But now, you obviously know that I like to keep as much stuff in the timeline as I can, and have tried to avoid saying this didn't happen, unless for very good reasons, like the ending of part 2. So with that in mind, I'll be slicing off the very end of Jason Goes to Hell and placing it during the opening of this film. Anyways, if Jason Goes to Hell's events take place roughly around the year 2000, that means we're right now somewhere within the years 2001 to 2005, give or take. Back to our film. The sheriff's rejection leads Stubb to track down Laurie and her friends, who he knows are at the epicenter of this whole thing. He crashes the Scooby Gang's meetup and recaps the legend of Jason Voorhees for us. Hilariously, when Stubb suggests he's a copycat, Linderman says this.
No, he's not a copycat. I've seen what he can do. He's the real Jason.
Like, forget whatever personal beef Creighton Duke had with Jason. I want to know when Linderman saw what Jason can do. He may not be from Crystal Lake, but I've got a sneaking suspicion you'll find some newspaper clippings somewhere in his room. The Scooby Gang conclude that Freddy must have brought Jason back to life and to Elm Street to propagate fear and bring about his own return. Realizing things are dire, Will brings up that he and Mark didn't have any dreams at Weston Hills, and that they were on a pill called Hypnosil. Googling the drug, they find it's a dream suppressant, and they break into Weston Hills to get enough for everyone, with Jason silently in tow. They split into 2 groups to explore the hospital. Laurie, Will, and Kia in one group, Stubbs, Freeberg, and Linderman in the other. But Freeberg is the first to be picked off when he falls asleep smoking a joint, allowing Freddy to take control of him. The first thing Freddy Freeberg does is dump a bunch of Hypnosil down the drain, followed by loading up 2 IVs full of the same tranquilizer used to put out Mark earlier in the film. We also learned during this segment that Laurie's father is the one who assigned the Hypnosil to the town's teen population. Stubbs and Linderman find Freeberg at the same time Jason finds them, and a misplaced machete swing juices up Jason with the biggest dose of electricity he's gotten so far. And if my theory about him growing in power with every time he's charged up is true, then these kids are absolutely fucked. And this also means that the electrocution Rowan described was his 4th power-up before the cybernetic upgrade. Yeesh. Jason chases them throughout the hospital, but is put to sleep by Freeberg, who is cut through the middle for his troubles. At long last, the 2 titans clash in the nightmare escape. Impersonating Pamela, Freddy rips into Jason's inability to stop killing, comparing him to a stupid, hungry dog. Freddy throws everything he has at our mama's boy, from blunt force trauma to stabbings to treating him like a human pinball and even crushing him under a large smelting vat of some kind, but finds he just won't die. But as the arena is further destroyed under their blows and water begins to pour out from the overhead pipes, Jason hesitates and Freddy realizes Jason may have fears after all. And no, it's not water. Not a single Friday the 13th film has ever suggested Jason was afraid of water, least of all this one. Spoilers, he's afraid of drowning, the only thing that's ever truly killed him. I mean, it's 2025, media literacy is something people are much more aware of right now, so I feel like everyone finally understands this. But I was surprised there was a controversy about this in the first place. I saw this film for the first time with my brother in, I believe, 2004, when I was 9, and I even understood it on the first go. Anyways, Freddy realizes Jason has a fear after he sees the behemoth reduced to a quivering child beneath the water stream, and deduces it's from his final moments as a normal human, when he died for the first time in Crystal Lake. He's afraid to drown. Food for thought. This could be the inner child Jason that occasionally lashes out at people. In the waking world, we see the remaining Scooby Gang members have Jason duct taped in the back of the van. Their goal? Take his ass back to Crystal Lake, pull Freddy out of the nightmarescape, and let the two killers duke it out. Also, funny to think that in Jason Goes to Hell, he was flown to Ohio and had to walk back home, but here he's resurrected back home and is forced to walk to Ohio. Being Jason is pain. I wouldn't wish walking to Ohio on my worst enemies. Laurie agrees to use herself as bait, to be put under so that she might pull Krueger from the nightmarescape and into the waking world. This all leads into two great set pieces, the first being Jason's inner psyche, a nightmarish, twisted version of Crystal Lake that stretches as far as the eye can see, with corpses sticking up from the dirt in the water, with Jason's home floating in the center. And if this is meant to represent Jason's home, then it would be representing the Voorhees house we saw in Jason Goes to Hell. Obviously, they're not meant to visually be the same house, but we can ignore the aesthetic difference. Anyways, the second great set piece is Camp Crystal Lake, circa 1957. Laurie quickly realizes she's not in her own nightmare, she's in Jason's, as she watches him being tormented by the other campers and chased into the lake, where he's pulled under the water by Freddy. Because, Freddy kills you with your fears, and Jason is afraid of drowning, not water. That's why when Jason's curled up on the floor as a child in the water stream earlier, Freddy doesn't say, "Oh, you're afraid of water." He looks at the boy and says, "Now we're getting somewhere, let's see what really scares you, gotta dig a little deeper," which leads to the Crystal Lake nightmare about drowning. One could even argue Jason is afraid of being bullied or being different, but we'll save that for another day. As Jason drowns in the waking world, an argument arises as to who has to give him mouth-to-mouth, which gives us this fantastic line.
Kia, he has asthma!
Jason, being the world's most famous abstinence practitioner, violently wakes up when Kia kisses him, prompting Linderman to shoot off Stubbs' pistol, which causes Will to veer off the road and flip the van. Jason is launched into the woods, and the teens carry on foot to the camp while Laurie fends off Krueger alone. It's here that she learns her father didn't kill her mother. Freddy did. Following this, Freddy seemingly intends to have his way with Laurie, as he slices her up in the same way he did her mother, which is exceedingly dark. This is Freddy at his absolute best, a blend of the legitimate nightmare fuel from 1 through 3, combined with the sick sense of humor from 4 through 6. In the waking world, Jason of course tracks the teens down and bursts into the cabin they're holed up in, accidentally setting it alight in the process. He nearly slices Will in half and throws both Kia and Linderman across the room, the latter being impaled on some kind of broken bracket. A rogue flame burns Laurie awake, but not before she gets her hands on her would-be abuser and rips him from the nightmarescape, leaving him in front of a really pissed off Jason. The pair finally face off for real, and Freddy proves the more agile of the two, while Jason obviously the stronger. But credit where credit is due, Freddy gets pretty battered here, all things considered, showing he's roughly as durable as Jason is. He's impaled on the same spike as Linderman, then ran through several panes of glass and wooden walls, no doubt destroying his ribs, and finally chucked 20 to 30 feet through the air into the roof of another cabin. Also, peep Jason running here. My boy's the slowest and the fastest Jason. And no doubt he would have continued to body Freddy if he hadn't tossed him away, thus giving a moment to recover. Off in the woods, Kia sets Linderman against a tree while she goes for help, unaware he's bleeding to death. As Kia briefly reunites with her friends, we get a really clear look at what's been going on around the campground since we last saw it for those brief few moments in Jason Goes to Hell. For one thing, the entrance is gated off, and just past those two cabins we can see a large framework for the luxury fishing cabins being built, along with signs advertising them for a spring 2004 opening. Finally, a year intentionally placed on a prop made specifically for the film, which is clearly put in focus for the viewer. We haven't had one of those since Pamela's tombstone reveal in the final chapter. Okay, so this is before spring of 2004. Cool. That shortens the time frame I gave earlier. Kia does manage to distract Freddy long enough to save Will and Laurie, but she's quickly done in by Jason. The pair engage in combat again, and this time Freddy is not fucking around, jumping all over the fucking place and just digging into Jason with all he's got. But this is Jason after his third charge up, so he just keeps knocking Freddy around like a ragdoll, virtually unfazed. Realizing he's going to have to fight dirty, Freddy starts launching these compressed gas tanks at Jason, launching him off into the distance for once, hilariously. Freddy then pins Jason to the ground with several pieces of rebar and frees a suspended cement mixer, which smacks into him over and over. He then tries to run him down with a dump wagon, only to get caught in the cement mixer and knocked around himself, bringing him face to face with Jason once more. The cement mixer eventually frees the stuck dump wagon, which plows into the pair, sending them out onto the dock. Here, the pair slowly chip away at one another, with Freddy losing a lot of blood and becoming very clearly worn out, and Jason losing the fingers on his right hand as well as his machete. With the Titans reduced to little more than struggling half-dead creatures, Laurie and Will take the time to strike, dousing the dock with gasoline before lighting it, along with nearby propane tanks. As the fires spread, the pair play a little game of chicken, with Jason shoving his hands into Freddy's crushed ribs and ripping his right arm off. When it's Freddy's turn, he gives Jason back his machete, which prompts the big guy to take back his rib ticklers. The propane tanks explode, leveling the nearby cabins and turning Freddy and Jason into flaming fireballs as they're launched into the lake. Laurie and Will embrace, but Freddy resurfaces, machete in hand. He goes in for the kill, but Jason gives his final stand, doing to Freddy what had been done to him earlier, putting his opponent's own weapon through their chest. He then collapses into the lake, completely spent. Laurie takes the machete and cuts Freddy's head clean off, bringing our Friday the 13th timeline full circle. She tosses the blade back to Jason, and both he and his weapon sink to the lake floor. The lovers limp away victorious, the only people to ever best two slashers and live to tell about it. The film then cuts to an indeterminate amount of time later, and we see Jason rise from the lake, holding Freddy's head, which turns to the audience and winks. Cue Freddy's laughter, smash cut to black. And that's Freddy vs. Jason. While the plot was noticeably complex for a slasher film, it paid dividends, with Freddy vs. Jason becoming the highest earning entry in either franchise. And the timeline we're given works out pretty well too. So, we know Jason Goes to Hell is set in the early 2000s. We just don't know when exactly. And we know this film is set before spring 2004, since the under construction fishing cabins are set to open at that time. Fans commonly agree that this film occurs when it was released, August 2003. But let's really dig into this. For starters, look at the environmental clues. It's a bit rainy, leaves are everywhere, the corn is nearly ready for harvest, school season is in full swing, and everyone is wearing a jacket or long sleeves. This isn't summer, it's not spring, this is early fall, which begins at the end of September and rolls out August. Second is the fact that the cornfield rave is advertised with a scarecrow, but things aren't specifically Halloween themed, which tells me it's either late September or early October. But the fact that everything is as chilly as it is makes me think October. Now what about the year? Remember this sign, pre-selling now for a spring 2004 opening? Yeah, this is referring to selling an off-plan property, which is essentially selling property that hasn't had a structure built on top of it yet, and is primarily marketed to real estate investors for more favorable financing options. It's done up to 2 years in advance as a way for investors to potentially see capital growth or for developers to get a boost in funding early on for further construction. Now, we can see the advertised final product mock-up is to have several cabins. In reality, we see some scaffolding and old camp cabins that have yet to be torn down, meaning construction has hardly begun. It's unlikely this project would be finished within the half a year it would take if this film happened in August 2003. Also, off-plan property sales typically happen 12 to 24 months out from completion, and October 2002 is 17 months away from spring 2004, so it fits perfectly. I know this is a really overly technical analysis compared to anything else I've done for this series so far, but they're the ones who designed the prop and set design and filmed it when they did, not me. So, if Freddy vs. Jason is happening in October of 2002, when is Jason Goes to Hell happening? Let's think about it. Freddy has been dormant for 4 years now, meaning 1998. Jason Goes to Hell has to occur no earlier than the year 2000. It's unlikely Freddy began looking for someone to help him as early as 98, since it probably would have taken him some time to figure out how they were blocking him from returning, then more time to formulate a plan, all before he actively began searching. The question then becomes, when does it make sense for Freddy to resurrect Jason in relation to finding him? Surely he didn't find him in 2000 and wait 2 years to do anything about it. But the alternative doesn't feel any better. With Freddy grabbing the mask and immediately setting about his plan, meaning Jason Goes to Hell occurs in the summer of 2002, with Freddy and Jason happening just a few months later. Ultimately, we have to make some compromises and a few assumptions. First things first, we've got to commit and just say Jason Goes to Hell occurs in the year of 2000, as nothing in Freddy vs. Jason helps us here. The year 2000 satisfies all the lore that film presents while keeping the timeline reasonably tidy. Second, like I mentioned, we've got to assume that the final shots of Jason Goes to Hell, this bit here with Freddy's glove, are happening sometime after Steven and Jessica walk off into the sunset. In fact, it only makes sense for it to occur during Freddy's monologue in the opening to Freddy vs. Jason, immediately prior to invading Jason's dreams. So, in the summer of 2000, Jason is sent to Hell. 2 years later, in October of 2002, Freddy Krueger learns about Jason and resurrects him to help reinstate his own power. Now, how about that ending? What do we glean from it? Well, like Jason Goes to Hell, the ending isn't really meant to be a literal event. It's a fourth wall break for the audience, a wink from Ronnie Yu and New Line Cinema to the millions of Friday and Nightmare fans. But that hasn't stopped them from coming up with their own interpretations, the most famous being that, well, both Titans came out victorious. Freddy's goal and Jason's goal really aren't that different. Both want to go home and go back to killing. For Freddy, that entails spreading fear of his name. In this case, he's gotten everything he wanted and more. Jason killed over a dozen kids in Springwood, no doubt putting Krueger's name back on the map in a really big way. Plus a mess ton of Hypnosil was thrown out, meaning the patients who fear Freddy are fair game once more. Even though he was killed in the real world, it shouldn't change anything about his ability to invade dreams and kill kids. After all, someone getting a personal victory over Krueger, only to find out that he's only slowed down, not killed, is a pretty common nightmare ending. And what else would a wink from Freddy imply, if not that everything is going to be a-okay in Dreamland? For Jason to achieve his goal, he simply needs to survive the night, and seemingly he does. But take a look at Crystal Lake in this scene. Ethereal, all landscape blocked out, shrouded in a dense fog you can cut with a machete. It's dreamlike. It's the same dreamscape we saw from the film's opening. You can actually always tell when we're in Dream Crystal Lake, as the film makes extensive use of background replacements for these moments. The dreamscape is also, coincidentally, the only place Freddy acknowledges the viewer directly. What does this mean for Jason, exactly? Honestly, nothing. Whether he's in hell dreaming or on Earth dreaming, we all know he can't die. He can never die. Jason coming out victorious was a foregone conclusion, as his death was never on the table to begin with. Both killers are primed to make their respective returns. Now lastly, I'd like to spend some time trying to bridge the ending of Freddy vs. Jason to the opening of Jason X. Recall that Jason X opens in the future with Jason alive and well, but in captivity. Interestingly, Jason has flesh-colored skin, red blood, and lots of hair. For the majority of Zombie Jason's time as, well, a zombie, there have been a few subtle consistencies in his characterization that you may have never noticed. No hair. Gray or black skin. Non-red viscous blood. No regeneration. Jason X jettisons all of this by giving him a full head of hair, flesh-toned skin, warm red blood, and doesn't just say he can regenerate tissue, but shows him having 2 eyes and a nose. This is practically an entirely different character. But Ken Kirzinger's Jason seems to be the missing link. This Jason has some hair, but it's wispy. He has black skin, yes, but he bleeds warm red blood. And while he does lose his fingers in the climax, and they stay gone until the ending, recall how Jason enters the fray in this film in the first place. That's right. Through whatever powers the Dream Demon used on Jason, we see his body regenerate from nothing, growing skin and organs where there was none. Given that Freddy's power set includes the manifestation of physical items from a non-physical dimension, i.e. he can make something appear out of thin air if you wake up from his nightmares holding that thing, it stands to reason he did the same with the clothes and mask Jason used, which are not the clothes or mask he had in Jason Goes to Hell, or ever for that matter, since this is a brand new Hawk. So my theory is that whatever supernatural force regrew Jason's body has also given Jason new powers of regeneration, which he didn't have before. I also believe this resurrection specifically overrides the Voorhees bloodline curse, not just because Jason is alive without having to have possessed a Voorhees woman, but because regeneration is self-sustaining and using biologically related human hosts is not. This is why he has hair and warm red blood in Freddy vs. Jason when he's never had that before while undead. And this is why he has healthy skin, a nose, both eyes, all of his fingers, and a full head of hair in Jason X. That's what this Jason would eventually begin to look like if he continued healing from his injuries. With all 11 original Friday the 13th films now dissected, let's lay everything out in chronological order. In the summer of 1957, 11-year-old Jason Voorhees drowns at Camp Crystal Lake. His mother, Pamela, blames the counselors for his death, and a year later, when the camp is reopened in 1958, she kills 2 of them. The camp would close indefinitely, with all future attempts to reopen met with sabotage. At some point, she comes into contact with the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, an eldritch book of spells, and subsequently her entire bloodline is cursed to facilitate the continuous rebirth of her son. On June 13th, 1979, after a year of tireless renovations from the son of the original camp owners, Pamela sets out to kill every single person hired on, but is herself decapitated by the lone survivor, Alice Hardy. That night, Jason is reborn through his mother's corpse and flees into the night with her head, clothes, and machete. The following morning, June 14th, Alice would be attacked by a psychic projection of an 11-year-old, waterlogged Jason. 2 months later, in August, Jason would track down Alice and kill her, taking her body with him. In the summer of 1982, a young Chris Higgins is similarly attacked by a psychic projection, this time of a fully grown Jason. Starting on June 10th, 1984, Jason would wreak havoc across the Crystal Lake area, killing several young adults and teenagers, and leaving behind only a select few survivors. On June 13th, just 3 days into his massacre, Jason would be killed by Chris Higgins. However, the following day, June 14th, Jason rises from the morgue and continues his murder spree until the 16th, when he's killed once more by a frenzied 12-year-old Tommy Jarvis. Following this, Jason would be interred in a local cemetery, while Tommy spends the next 6 years in an institution. On October 12, 1990, after being released but still haunted by Jason, Tommy sets out to destroy the killer's body for good, only to inadvertently resurrect him. More powerful than before, Jason begins a new killing spree. The following day, on October 13th, Tommy manages to return him to his watery grave. Later that same night, a young telekinetic girl by the name of Tina Shepard accidentally drowns her father in Crystal Lake in a freak accident, beginning her own 6-year stint of hospitalization. About a year later, in the spring of 1991, while Jason rests beneath the water, a young Rennie Wickham is tossed overboard into the lake, where she's accosted by a psychic projection of an 11-year-old Jason, forming a bond between the two that would last for years. 5 years after this, in October of 1996, Tina returns home to Crystal Lake, but accidentally frees Jason from his wet prison with her telekinesis. Luckily, she's able to use her abilities to return him there. Another half-year later, in the spring of 1997, Jason is powered up via a rogue power cable and frees himself from his chains. He then travels downriver to a nearby harbor where he boards a cruise ship en route to New York City, where he's eventually melted down in a rushing torrent of toxic runoff. At an unknown point between 1997 and 1999, Jason is reborn through a Voorhees family member and returns to stalk the old campgrounds. Then, in the summer after the turn of the millennium, Jason's body is once again destroyed, this time by the FBI, which forces him to track down and use his sister to be reborn anew. Immediately after this, his niece, Jessica Kimball, fulfills the Voorhees prophecy and finally sends Jason to hell. Jason's soul would only rest in hell for about 2 years, until October of 2002, when he's resurrected by Freddy Krueger using his demonic dream magic, which inadvertently gives Jason the ability to regenerate, effectively replacing the death curse. It's not known exactly how long Jason would freely roam Crystal Lake going forward, but it is known that sometime prior to 2008, he came under possession of the Crystal Lake Research Facility. After at least 2 years of study, at some point after 2010, he's placed in cryostasis, alongside the researcher assigned to his case, Rowan LaFontaine, and neither are woken up again until 2455, when a salvage crew finds them on a now derelict Earth, en route to humanity's new homeworld, Earth 2, and after he's given a new cybernetic body, Jason is ejected into orbit and burns up upon re-entry, leaving behind nothing but the charred remains of his metallic, futuristic hockey mask. And that is the complete Friday the 13th timeline. Well, the complete Friday the 13th film timeline, anyway. Unfortunately, dear viewer, Jason has even more adventures in the worlds of original novels and comic book tie-ins, which further flesh out his bloody corner of Crystal Lake. But that will have to wait for another time, as the Halloween season is fast approaching and all focus across YouTube will be shifting to a certain masked nut job. If you've stuck around this long, I just wanted to say thank you. I will ask that if you enjoyed to please like the video. It may not seem like it does much, but it actually does a lot. And if you enjoyed this style of narrative deep dive, then I'd recommend subscribing and sticking around for more. That was the tale of the man under the lake. Yeah, I know. It got intense there a few times, but I'm proud of you for sticking through it. Pass me one of those s'mores. What, another story? It's getting late, but okay. One more story.